Welcome to the Atheist Roundtable, y'all.
Pause the mic.
Glad you could join us. Welcome to the table, the stable of people that kill it raves. What you came in to do? Pause the mic, break it down like a crossover from Alan and I. Right in your eye, then there's just Jeff. What's next? There's my boy Arthur ripping pages at your text. Dude Steve, like a movie in the murder shed, man. Kill D, Ben G. Dude, please, the Bruce Lee with the fucking SE. Then there's OZ. You don't be knowing nothing about nothing, man. Mute Oz. So grab your drinks, your paper and pen. Class is in session. Let the lesson begin.
Welcome to the Atheist Roundtable. Whoa, who was that rapping, man? Hey, I don't know if Ben G in the background. Ben, can you hear me, man?
Hey, what's up?
Hey, who was that rapping on the intro?
Was that Mr. Oz, the Mute Oz himself?
I'm not sure. It sounded like Big Pun. Is Big Pun alive? I don't know if you remember Big Pun. Big Pun was one of them big players from New York back in the day. But anyway, I promise you, we do have the rights to that music. That is the Oz licking it. He's in the booth, laying bars down. We've got bars for days. That's the Oz. That's Austin. Get with him if you want any rapping done. He does requests. I think he's on that. What's that app where they do the requests, Ben? Help me out here.
There's like a Fiverr app. I'm not sure which one he uses.
Yeah, he takes requests. He takes tithing for those. So, but anyway, welcome to the debate. This is Tart. We're putting on a debate today. We got Ben G. He's going to be holding the position of evolution. We've got Mr. Adam Rich. He's one of our good friends from TikTok. Awesome guy. Adam Rich is going to be holding the position of creation or creationism. And what we're going to do, we're going to start off with an introduction. They got 10 minutes each, and they arm wrestled backstage earlier. They had an arm wrestle. Ben won, unfortunately. I'm not sure why. His right arm was a little stronger than his left. There's a debate going on about that, actually. But Ben won, so he's going to go first. And let me bring them up. We're going to do a 10-minute intro for both of them, and then we're going to go straight into an open discussion. They want to chat about the intros, but let me bring these guys up here. Let's see. All right, guys. Let me get Adam in the chat. What's going on, Adam? How are you guys doing today?
Good. How are you?
Good. I'm excited.
Yeah, me too.
Adam, I do want to apologize for that music up front. That was Austin. So no disrespect to your world.
Yeah, it wasn't offensive, the words. It was just offensive that it was Austin.
Yeah, exactly.
No.
Exactly. Very good point. And
No,
being that you're from,
I love you, brother. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, and being that you're from Michigan and stuff, the home of the Caucasian rap world, Austin probably wouldn't fit in up there.
No, wouldn't stand a chance, but he did all right.
Anyway, I'm going to get myself off screen. Ben, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'm going to start this clock. And we have a strict timing rules. Don't go over time because I will yell out Richard Dawkins if you're going over. Okay, that's the code word. Anyway, guys, take it away.
All right. So I guess I'm going to go first. So I'm going to go through a kind of a pretty structured argument, I guess, that I have, or opening statement. Okay. All right. So first off, I just want to point out for everyone that I'm not an expert in biology, theology, or really expertise in anything. I do have a bachelor's degree in music education and completed some of a master's in the same field. So I have a very lay understanding of evolution, but I think I can still articulate why I think it's most likely true. The resources which I recommend for everybody watching this and from which I got a lot of the following information are from biologos.org, the Smithsonian Human Origins Project website, and talkorigins.org. Those last two especially have collected the evidence in a clear and organized fashion. You could go through and click on links to the actual research that was published in peer-reviewed journals. And that each of those discusses some of the fossils and things like that. All right. Let's see. I recommend those websites for the kind of deeper information, which we may not actually get to discuss today. This will not be a debate or conversation about Christianity, God, or religion. What I'm defending is known as the theory of evolution by natural selection, which is the explanatory theory of biodiversity, or how species originated. The belief that I hold, which is under scrutiny, is that all animals and plants and living organisms have a common ancestor. That's like the crux, I think, of the belief. My confidence in this proposition is proportional to the evidence that I have, and I hope to get to some of the evidence in just a minute. So evolution by natural selection is the scientific theory which is readily accepted by about half of American Christians. So that's actually a good indicator that even if a person accepts the theory of evolution by natural selection, then one can still accept and adhere to Christianity. An explicitly Christian organization by the name of BioLogos, right, biologos.org, they're dedicated to educating Christians about a traditional Christian view, which includes the science involved with evolution. So some of the terms that I want to make sure that we're consistent with throughout the conversation, I want to make sure that we understand that evolution is the expression of new or different phenotypes over time through genetic variation. So, things like adaptation, we would still consider that evolution, I believe. Speciation is the distinction we make when one species is no longer recognizable. It must be regarded as a new or different organism. Natural selection is the collection of pressures when applied to a species which select for certain phenotypes by the survival of the fittest. Fittest here meaning able to pass along its genes to the next generation. There's no other kind of baggage with the word fittest. Artificial selection is similar to natural selection, except that instead of natural pressures, humans make selections and decide which phenotypes to select for, which ones we prefer. I want to get out ahead of a few claims, which I think Adam may attempt to associate this debate with. I've gotten to watch some of his TikToks, and so I'm familiar with some of the claims that I just want to get out ahead of. I'm not saying that I know how or whether abiogenesis occurred. I'm not saying that God does not exist or was not involved with the process of evolution, no matter what I think about whether or not God was actually necessary. I'm not saying that morality is or should be derived from evolutionary theory. We'll see if these topics come up, but I want to make sure that we're discussing the evidence I'm about to put forward, and then what kind of explanations we have for that evidence. We'll also be probably debating about some necessary assumptions. I think my proposition here is that the only assumption one has to make in order to accept the theory of evolution by natural selection is that natural laws we observe today are consistent through time, at least to about 2.5 billion years ago. At the point, which is the point of the origin of living things on Earth, give or take, obviously, a few million years. Adam, on the other hand, may bring other assumptions to the table. In order for him to dismiss the evidence I will present, he must demonstrate good reasons for accepting his additional assumptions. I have one more definition before I start laying out a few of the facts that I'd like to discuss today. The words are scientific theory. A scientific theory attempts to create the most elegant explanation for a collection of facts. The theory of evolution by natural selection came about because of several different disciplines' collections of observations. So here are some of the facts that I want to make sure that we consider. These are the facts that I believe strongly suggest that evolutionary theory is accurate. So number one, genes randomly mutate. All right, they can even mutate during your lifetime in certain cells. This is actually the cause of cancer. So in the theory of evolution, one only needs to accept that the offspring is never exactly the same as the parent. So genes randomly mutate. Two, organisms which survive and reproduce pass on their genes. So this one should be easy to accept. You can't pass on your genes if you don't survive long enough or otherwise lack the ability to produce offspring. Along with that, genetic mutations which do not aid in reproduction do not pass on with the same frequency as genetic mutations, which prove useful in that regard. Sometimes non-useful genetics get passed along, even at a cost to the organisms, such as the peacock's tail, because of sexual selection or other natural/artificial pressures, which I mentioned earlier. An example of artificial pressure would be like the selection for dairy cows, which produce more milk. Next, archaeological fossil record. So from biologos.org on this topic, Fossils provide a window into the distant past, revealing how life has changed across vast periods of Earth's history. The arrangement of fossils within rock layers and across the world is highly ordered, and transitional fossils are abundant. While fossil evidence alone does not prove that all life forms are related by common ancestry, the fossil record is consistent with and highly suggestive of that conclusion. Predictions about where transitional fossils should be found, made on the basis of common ancestry, have yielded stunning discoveries, end quote. So we do know that fossilization is a rare event. Most organisms' remains do not get preserved in any fashion over any geological time span, just because rocks get pushed back underneath the Earth's crust, and we often lose most fossils. Yet, we find an abundance of examples of fossils whose timing would be consistent with an evolutionary timeline, and given the rest of the evidence that I have and that I'm presenting. Next, biogeographical distribution. So as a species population separates and encounters new natural pressures, such as the abundance of a certain type of food, certain adaptations occur. This is where Darwin's finches demonstrate that point. So beaks can change shape, other physical features such as color become prominent, and even though they have a common ancestral population, we could have 4 different birds appear on the different islands. They appear different, even though they have many similar features. Fish evolve in a similar way. Certain species of trout change color based on the advantages of that color in a specific body of water. I once got to see rainbow trout that were hidden in a cave, and they were able to present that natural coloration because there was no light to reflect off that. So they're very beautiful. At the Grand Canyon, for another example, there are 2 types of squirrels which exist that are very similar, but they're not able to produce offspring anymore because one speciated from the other, one on the north rim and one on the south. They were 2 separated in natural pressures selected for certain phenotypes. Next, anatomical evidence, things like vestigial organs, bones, like things like why do whales have legs, or vestigial bones where their hip joints would be. So human origins are explained easily in this regard because there is evidence of many non-humans and non-apes throughout the last 7 million years. Yet their anatomical makeup shows a progression in a chronological order of non-human to human in terms of skull shape, the length of arms and legs, etc. Next, we have direct observation today. We have the Harvard bacteria experiment where cells broke through different levels of bacteria-resistant agar and ended up becoming completely resistant to bacteria-resistant stuff. Pesticide-resistant insects would be another example, very similar to the bacteria, but it's insects. So now we have this animal that's dealing with those. And we also have things like AIDS, which we're able to track back to Africa. And then we have different versions of AIDS in different places based on geographical distribution. I'm almost done. I know I've only got a few seconds. So here I am closing. Again, the only assumption one needs to make in order to accept that evolution by natural selection occurred is that natural laws are consistent within the last 2.5 billion years. Given the body of facts and the modest assumption I make, I accept that evolution by natural selection most likely happened. So Adam has to undermine the reasoning that I use with either a better epistemology or provide groundbreaking evidence which counters the best experts' opinions in their given fields. And so that's the end of what I got. And I will give my time over to Adam.
Okay. Okay, Benji, that was well said. That was brilliantly said. And to be honest with you, many people are probably not going to believe this, but I agree with almost everything you said. There were so many things on there that I do agree with. I think that the biggest one that we are going to agree on throughout the course of our time talking is going to be microevolution, which is otherwise known as adaptation. That one, I have never denied adaptation. I think that humans, we show it all the time. I mean, if you go to the gym and you work out, your body will adapt. You will become stronger. You will become more shredded. Your physique will look good. Your body will run better. It will be healthier when you eat better. That's adaptation. That is not evolution, because if you stop working out, your body will go right back. Now, when we talk about evolution, we're talking about gaining basically strengths or losing weaknesses to then carry that on to your offspring. So over time, the best survival of the fittest, basically the best ones will survive, the weaker ones will die off. So when you talk about evolution, we have to assume that the whole idea, basically, to sum it up, and Ben, please correct me if I'm wrong when we rebuttal and stuff, but I believe that the whole basic idea of evolution is to gain strengths for survivability. It's all about survivability. The things will move in an order to best help them survive as a species, as a race, however you want to dice that up. Now, what I don't agree with is the time frame that we assume, because here's the thing: is a lot of people will think that my dead set belief is that the Earth is only 6,000 or 7,000 years old. I think that there is a lot of evidence to support that, but I also believe that there's a lot of evidence to support what Ben said. So it's not that I think that his reasoning is unsound. I think that he's got very sound reasoning. I think that he very eloquently put all of it. And I can totally understand why people believe that evolution happened and why it's a thing. What I don't agree with is when people say it's a proven fact, because it is not. We've never seen the major gaps, like, for instance, an amoeba slowly turning to a whale. Now, we've seen quote unquote transitional fossils, but all we have seen actually is we've seen similar animals, especially in the fossil record. We have seen similar animals. And then even with DNA, even when you do DNA testing, it shows that these animals are similar, just like it shows that humans are similar to apes and primates and monkeys and things. And I'm not saying that we came from monkeys. I know a lot of people are going to assume that's where I'm going with it, but I'm not. What I am saying is, just because we are similar to many different animals, not just primates, but we are similar to many different animals, if you look at the DNA and the percentage of what DNA matches. And I believe we're similar. We're similar even down to fruits and plants on some level. Now, it's a very low percentage, but the point of the matter is every living thing that has DNA, we are similar in some respect. So I think me and Ben totally agree that there is a common ancestor. I just don't believe that I don't believe it's an amoeba. I believe it's Adam and Eve. I believe that all the humans have similar, and we have similar DNA with other animals. All life has DNA, which I believe is the signature of God, basically, not literally, not with a pen on paper, but it's basically his fingerprint. It's basically him showing that we are everything that has life is related by the fact that we have life. Now, that's not enough. That one statement isn't enough to seal it, obviously. But I think when you do more research and you find other things, it all, like I've said before, when Ben was on there, when I did my last time on the Atheist Roundtable, I said that it's like a puzzle. It's you take a bunch of puzzle pieces and put these things together. There is no one thing that I can point to and say, see, I told you. I think it's a collection of evidences or evidential support that I say. And I think that it gives me sound reason for believing what I do. And like I said, I totally agree with Ben why he believes what he does. I don't think that he's foolish for thinking this. I don't think that he's been tricked or manipulated or anything. I think that what we have to realize is there is evidential support for a lot of different theories. There is more evidential support for the common two theories, which is evolution and creationism. And that's why those two stand out at the forefront of this discussion. There's many theories about how animals have diversified and why, but they're so small there's a lot of holes in each one. But when you're talking about creationism and evolutionism, the reason why these two are at the forefront is because there is so much support for it. So when people try to say that creationism is silly and it's a ridiculous belief and it's all based off the Bible and things like that, it's a very foolish statement because you're not giving enough credit to the counter argument for why evolution is disbelieved by so many people. It's not just me. I'm not the lone wolf on here going to bat at it. It's just that I do believe the Bible, so that is part of it. It's not the whole thing. And there's a lot of people, Ben pointed out perfectly, that there's a lot of Christians that believe in evolution and the Bible. I just think, I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but I just think that it's a lack. I don't want to say it without being too mean, but if you believe that the Bible is true, then I don't know how you can say that you are a Christian and believe in evolution. And that's not a shot. I don't mean that in that way, but let me explain. What I mean by that is it's very specific how God said that he created the earth and how he created the people and where the animals came first. So in evolution, that fits perfectly. The animals did come before people, and God said that in the Bible. And even if you don't believe the Bible, you still believe the same thing. Animals came before people. We all agree on that, I think. But that being said, it is very clear how God described creating the first man and creating the first woman, for that matter. Now, you can say that that's, what's metaphor. You can say that that's not literal, But I think you would be doing a very big disservice to the Bible, especially when Jesus, if you do as a Christian believe in Jesus, then Jesus himself said that Adam was there in the beginning. Now, if there had been millions and billions of years that had passed, and all these animals had lived all these lives and evolved slowly over time, then that would be a lie from Jesus. And I think any Christian is going to tell you the same thing. Jesus wasn't a liar. Okay, it wasn't his thing. So if he is correct, which I believe he is, obviously, if I believe he's God, I don't think he's lying. If that's true, then there is no such thing as evolution. Now, it's not just about the Bible, though. So I'm going to try to avoid talking about Christianity and things like that as much as I can for the sake of the argument. However, I'm not going to be able to avoid the idea of God as a whole, because I think the idea of creationism comes from God. So I am going to have to touch on it a little bit, but I will try to keep my religion as far out of it as I possibly can. That being said, though, guys, I do think that when you look at the fossil record, I think that people get this confused about the quote unquote fossil record. All it is it's a collection of fossils. It's not an actual record. There's no testimony. There's no talking. There's no date stamped on them. It's not an actual record or a recording. It's just a collection of fossils. So I think when we use that term, it kind of steers people into a different direction, and that's okay. But what we do find is we find tons of layers in the earth. And people will say that that's from different ages, different years, millions of years apart and all these things. But I always ask, if it's on the earth and the earth was created at a certain time, where are these layers coming from exactly? Why are they different ages? Wouldn't they be on earth all at the same time? Why, or are they getting flown in from outer space? How are they just abundantly being created? And why are they separate years apart? Basically, you would have to make the assumption that the layers are different ages if it came from somewhere else in millions of years gaps. Like each age is 10 millions apart, 100 millions years apart, all these different ages. So it's very difficult to explain the age of the layers. If you're assuming they're different ages, then you have to explain where did they come from then, because if they weren't all on Earth at the same time, which I believe they were, then where did they come from? Why are they different ages? I believe that all the layers that we see are because of the flood, which goes back to the Bible. But I do believe that the reason you see so many fossils all over the entire world, and you see so many layers in rocks and mountains and canyons, you can clearly see layers in canyons. If you go to the Grand Canyon, nobody will deny seeing lines, almost perfectly straight lines, by the way, because of gravity, hydrologic sorting, because of the flood, and all these different layers of these animals. Now, we can say that these animals come from, that they've evolved and all this stuff. And Ben made a perfect observation when he said that you can kind of predict what kind of animals you'll see. And I don't think it's because of the evolution of them. I think it's because of the density of these animals, the similarity of these animals. Because when you see similar animals and they all have the same density, what you would find is if you mixed up a bunch of different layers of like rock and gravel and sand and all these things, and you filled a whole cup with water and you shook it all up and you threw some fossils in there, they're going to start, after time, you're going to see layers form from these different sand, rocks, mud, dirt, gravel, all these different things. You're going to see layers form after, and you're going to see the denser animals drop to the bottom. Now, you're going to see some variation. It doesn't mean that everything with a specific weight is all going to be in the exact same spot or the exact same depth. It just means things are moving, things are dying at different times because of the flood, and then they're falling. Some things are getting eaten by other fish and sharks and whales that are in the water, because obviously they're not going to fossilize. There's no reason for them to die. Maybe some died off during this thing, but the majority of sea life is going to survive in a flood because it's just the water levels getting higher. So there's not a lot of that. But anyway, to make a long story short, I don't know how much time I have left, but I don't see a time anywhere. But anyway, I'll just sum it up with this and then I'll be done. I think that what we see, I think me and Ben, or creationism and evolutionism, has very good reasoning for why they believe what they do. I just, I tend to believe the Bible. I haven't found any flaws or any falsities in it so far. And I tend to see a lot of holes, which we'll touch on in a minute, between, like you said, biogenesis, morality, things like that. And me and Ben can get into that more later, but I'll just finish with that. Thank you. Oh, and thanks again, guys, for even having me on. I'm sorry, how rude of me to wait 10 minutes for that. But thank you, guys.
Awesome. It was right on time. You started at the 16-minute mark, and it's the 26-minute mark now. Perfect. So you guys are on time with the 10-minute openings. It's a little bit of a brief opening, I know, but we can segue into the open discussion now. So Again, I just wanted to come in and make sure you guys are okay. Any cuts and bruises so far, or are you guys good?
No, he took it easy on me. We're doing all right.
All right. Well, I'm gonna just open it up to. Don't forget to drop questions in the chat, because there is going to be a Q&A. I know there was a question earlier about that. I'll read out some questions momentarily when we get done with the open discussion, but I'm going to leave it up to Ben and Adam to have a cordial, civil, open discussion about the topics that have been brought up. And let me get out of here.
All right. Thank you. Oh, I guess I'm the bigger one now. But Adam, thank you for that, because that you did start to counter some of the things that I brought up. I do want to make sure, I want to see where exactly we agree through with my argument, and where we specifically disagree, because you brought up some points that could undermine some of my points, and I want to see if those are adequate to dismiss evolution. So like, first, do you agree that genes randomly mutate from generation to generation? Okay. So we know then that since genes mutate, the offspring are going to be slightly different, and that could be advantageous or not advantageous with every generation.
Yeah.
Okay. Organisms which survive and reproduce pass on their genes. So like, in order to pass on your genes, which do change over time, you have to, if you have genetics which don't lend themselves to that,
yeah,
they won't get passed on, right? Okay. So between just those 2 points, isn't it already easy to see how an organism could change over the course of many generations, just given those 2 facts alone? Okay. So, and then what do you think about my assumption then that natural laws are consistent through time to up to 2.5 billion years ago? And we don't have to go any further than that. We don't have to go to the creation of the Earth even, or the how the Earth came around. What do you think about that assumption?
That the laws
where would you go differently?
Like the laws hasn't changed? Is that what you're asking?
Natural laws, just like, so if we accept genetic mutation and we have a life form or early life forms, what about, couldn't those life forms just mutate over time and lead to biodiversity, just given those 2 facts alone?
If you're asking if it's possible, then absolutely it's possible. The only thing is that when it comes to gene deformities and things like that, the majority, and I'm sure you probably agree with this, that the majority of these deformities are not beneficial. And in fact, some are harmful, if not cause death. So, but it's not very often that you see a deformity that is beneficial, and especially then carried on to an offspring. So
Yeah.
But I do agree, yes, it is possible. Yeah.
So I agree with you there. So we have natural, so those would fall under what I call natural pressures, right? So if you have a mutation that's not beneficial, natural pressures remove those individuals from the gene pool.
Yes.
That makes sense?
Yeah.
So if we're removing the non-beneficial mutations, then it really is only the beneficial mutations which get passed along, correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So, so I don't understand how your point then that the majority of mutations aren't beneficial, how does that cancel out the idea that beneficial mutations could continue over the years?
Oh, I'm not saying they can't. I'm just saying that it's very, very rare that we find any kind of a beneficial mutation that does carry on. That's all.
Now, how rare then? So would you say like 99%?
I honestly have no idea. To be honest with you, I can't think of many at all.
So for my understanding, it would only have to be 1 out of like a million would have to be beneficial.
Right. Yes, absolutely. However, then you would have to guarantee that not only does that carry over, but then that like, say, okay, just to put it in terms that'll be easy to follow. Say a grandfather has is born and has some kind of a genetic mutation that is beneficial. You then have to mate with somebody, and then your offspring also has to have that, which is very rare. You just agreed with that yourself. But even if it is, say it did pass along, then that one has to then find another one to mate with to carry it on. It's very rare that as a matter of fact, we almost never see this happen where a grandfather has a genetic mutation that's beneficial, then has an offspring that also has that, and then another offspring that also has that. That almost never happens. In fact, I can't even think of one time that it's happened. I'm sure it has.
Now,
But
how
my point is, it's so rare that I don't know how you would be able to base an entire theory around that being the argument when it's so extremely rare that we almost never see that happen at all.
So I guess my point is that these genetic mutations would be so small you might not even see them outwardly, right? So I mean, like, I brought up some squirrels in the Grand Canyon. You know, you might have some squirrels that are a little bit darker than others, and that helps them blend in with their environment a little bit better because it's a little bit darker maybe on the north rim than it is on the south. And so now you've got squirrels that are increasingly darker because that's beneficial to them. And it's only a slight change that would lend its benefit. So even smaller changes than that over time. So it's not that once the mutation has occurred and that mutation passes along. And again, I'm like no expert, but my understanding is that a collection of small changes could overtake a population within a fairly short amount of time, because the ones that aren't beneficial, or if there are natural pressures which are selecting for certain hair color, for instance, then that hair color would become more prevalent, which is what happened with those squirrels. And eventually other mutations occur which either prove more or non-beneficial, and then you have speciation occurring. And we have direct observation of speciation occurring within those flies, AIDS, that bacteria from the Harvard experiment. What do you how do you answer for those kinds of observations?
Well, let me start with the squirrels, because there's a lot there to unpack. The squirrel thing, right? I think the big thing that me and you are kind of at different ends of the spectrum on, I wouldn't call it like disagreeing or whatever, but I think it's the perspective of how we're looking at that. So you're thinking that those squirrels change color to benefit them. And you can say that, but there's no proof of that being the case. And let me explain what I mean by that. If a squirrel, there's variations within a kind, within any animal. I think we know that. You see dogs, all different shapes, sizes, colors, all that. And we can say that it's evolution, or we can say that there are limitations within a breed or within a kind. We see all kinds of different colors. We see different hair length. We see different style of hair. We see different color eyes. We see all of those things. But nobody is proving that the change of color is a benefit. I mean, you can say that because it will help you blend in, but I'm looking at it as that's just a variation within the squirrel. There is different color squirrels. Like I have black squirrels running around my neighborhood. I also have gray ones and I have brown ones. Which one of them is the evolutionary benefit? You know, to say that like, for instance, my hair color is more blonde. It's more of a medium brown now, but when I was younger, my hair was super blonde, like platinum blonde when I was a little kid. It slowly has gotten darker over time. Now, I don't think that it's a benefit for me blending into my neighborhood or my environment. I think it's just, it has happened because my dad has almost black hair and my mom has blonde, and I have kind of a mix of the two. My wife now, she has black hair. My daughter has like a darker brown, medium brown color with a little bit of red, because I have a little tiny bit of red in my beard. Now, I don't think that that's a benefit to the species. I think that that's limitations or adaptations within the kind. You see different hair colors, and you're under the assumption, and trust me, this is not an attack. I'm just saying this is kind of the perspective difference. You're under the assumption that this is some kind of an evolutionary beneficial thing. I'm saying that it's just hair color, and it's just, there is different colors of squirrels. And so when you get one black squirrel to mate with a brown squirrel, you might get 10 squirrels, maybe 5 have black hair, 5 have brown hair. Well, then you get those 5 black-haired squirrels to mate with other black-haired squirrels or whatever. You're going to get more and more and more. Now, I do understand that happens, but that's not, in my opinion, that's not evolution, because there is no benefit to those different hair colors.
Excellent. Yeah, I'll interrupt you there just so I can tie this then with those squirrels. So you have I forget both the specific names, but you can look up these 2 squirrels. They really do exist. It's not an example. There's like a kaibib squirrel, and then the other one, somebody will comment. So they do have different hair color now. They did not originally. So certain hair colors are selected for, and that's what I mean by benefit. When I say benefit, it's just whether or not it allows them to propagate the species. If they keep getting killed at a younger age, and it's a statistical probability, and it doesn't happen from one generation to the next. It takes time. It takes many, many generations. And the evidence for these squirrels, it took like 10,000 years, I think, is what they found before they're anatomical structure was varied slightly. So it's not just a benefit in terms of it's passed on through genetics. So if you can't pass on your genes, then you die. Then those lighter brown hairs don't pass on. And then you have other things like certain bone structures might shift slightly, and then those are naturally selected for. So that's what I mean by benefit. Like, can you explain maybe what you mean by benefit? Because I'm not sure if we were talking.
Yeah, well, so I like when you explained how they're getting killed off, like their color is helping them survive longer.
Yes,
because they blend into the
and that's demonstrable, by the way.
Yeah, no, and I 100% agree with all of that. The difference, though, I guess that I'm saying is there's nothing evolutionary about that. That's just it's almost like if you take 10 blonde-haired people and they constantly are mating, there's a very good chance you're going to have a ton of blonde kids. That's not an evolutionary benefit to help them survive.
So if I could demonstrate that those two squirrels came from a common ancestor, right?
Yeah, squirrel.
Which was a squirrel,
right.
Correct. Now, they are two different species now. They cannot mate. They cannot create offspring together. They are two separate populations which can no longer mate together. Would you say that they're still the same kind?
Are they both squirrels?
They are both squirrels, yet they cannot mate. They have speciated.
Right.
Okay, so let's jump forward 100,000 years from now. They both have now created two more species of different squirrels, right? They're all still squirrels. And if all of these squirrels, by the way, lead back to an original squirrel, right? All right. When we get back to the level of squirrel or a non-squirrel, we have other mammals which are also non-squirrels. Now, I don't know everything about squirrels, right? But maybe dogs I understand a little bit better, right? Dogs, we got thousands of breeds of dogs which came from the gray wolf, right? So they're all a wolf kind. Is a Chihuahua still a wolf kind?
That's also an assumption. We can get into that in a minute, but go ahead. I'll let you finish. Sorry.
It might be an assumption, but the idea is that they are changing now. We've observed changes. You take that constant, remember my assumption that natural laws have occurred the same way for as far back as we know. It perfectly explains the anatomical structures we observe in the fossil record, the fossil records that we do have. And I agree with you that they can't dictate for themselves, but from what we understand about genetics, geographical distribution, and anatomical comparisons, and I want to get into a little bit of that a little bit later, we can say that squirrels did originate from an original squirrel, but then that original squirrel has a common ancestor with other mammals as well. So it's just like, we're taking this idea that squirrels are getting more and more diverse. They're all still squirrels. We take it back. Squirrels have a common ancestor with a lot of other mammals. All mammals go back to an original mammal. So all mammals are still a mammal kind. Mammals separated from reptiles. So mammals and reptiles have a similar kind. All reptiles, and I don't know everything, but there was an original animal. So all of the animals are still an animal kind. And so when we talk about microevolution versus macroevolution, it's really, we're talking about where do we draw the line between what we're calling micro versus macro, because I agree that all animals are an animal kind, and then animals and plants have a common ancestor too, even way further than that. It would be the theory. And to the best of my knowledge, the theory of evolution by natural selection accounts for that elegantly without any more assumptions.
Yes, but okay. So and now there was a lot there too. So let me try to do the best. No, it's okay. Let me try to do the best I can. So you did throw in an assumption. I don't know if you even caught it, but you did throw in an assumption of when you said now the squirrels have another mammal that is an ancestor. Basically, you put in there with zero. And I'm not attacking you, so I'm going to say this in that way, but no, because I hear this all the time. You're assuming that these squirrels have a different kind of an animal that is its ancestor. You're assuming that a different mammal is the squirrel's ancestor, like the very first squirrel came from something before it. That is where I have a big problem with evolution, because there is zero evidence for that. Now, that's the thing that we're all told in school. That's what's in the science books. That's what's and you even alluded to that. You were talking about the different animals all coming back to a different spot and all that stuff. That right there is an assumption. Nobody has ever shown that to ever happen. Nobody has ever witnessed that. It has never been demonstrated or seen. It is an assumption based off of looking at similar animals in the quote unquote fossil record. So when you see that like for instance, a zebra and a horse and a donkey, they all look very similar. They all look like the same kind of animal. And I do believe that horses and zebras can mate. And then it's something like a horse and a donkey can mate and make a mule. But then after that, the mule can't mate, can no longer mate, or something along those lines. This doesn't show that there is evolution. It shows that there is different animals within that subgroup. I call it kind because that's what the Bible says, but it basically it goes along these lines. All dogs, and including wolves, can mate together for the most part. I mean, maybe there's some reason why a specific one can't, or maybe there's some kind of a deform. Like you said, I agree with the mutations, things like that. But on a pure level, wolves, dogs, they can mate with each other. Like if you took if I don't think that a Great Dane and a Chihuahua could mate the traditional way just due to size, but I do believe if you took the sperm of the Great Dane and the egg of the Chihuahua, I do believe you could make a new type of dog because there are limitations within that kind. So that's what I was getting at with the different squirrels and the different colors and all that. Mm-hmm. See, one way of looking at it is that over time, the natural selection is choosing the one with the evolutionary benefit, like the one that can blend into its environment. What I'm saying is maybe because they can blend into their environment, that's what helps them survive longer. It's not that evolution is choosing it or a natural selection is choosing for them to survive better. It's that they can survive better because they can stay hidden. So therefore, after a while, all the ones that aren't hidden as much get eaten off, and then they become extinct, and the only ones you have left. Now, that to me is not evolving into a new animal. I do agree with natural selection. I do agree with if I have blonde hair and my wife doesn't, but my daughter did have blonde hair, and then she got married to somebody else that had blonde hair, there's a good chance that their kids have blonde hair. Now, that my wife still has black hair. You know what I'm saying? So that's not an evolutionary survival of the fittest thing.
Right.
That's just, but I do agree with natural selection. I do agree with you on that in the sense that if you have enough of one thing and if you have a redhead and it mates with another redhead, there's a good chance that kid's going to be a redhead. That does not mean it's an evolutionary thing. That kid did not evolve. That is not some kind of a benefit that helps them survive. It's the fact that the DNA in those two parents, the dominant gene is red hair. So that kid gets that dominant gene. This is not an evolutionary thing. This is an adaptation or a limitation within the kind of a scenario. So I think that's where we're going to disagree on this. Because I don't think when you talked about the bacteria and you talked about we see speciation, I agree, but that's all adaptation. We've never seen a bacteria become any other animal or any other kind of thing. It's all bacteria. When it evolves into another bacteria, just like a squirrel goes all the way back to a squirrel. But then the assumption in evolution is that squirrel came from something else, which is something we've never seen, never demonstrated. It's pure belief, and that's okay. But it's not a fact or not proven to be true.
You did mention earlier that we have never seen major gaps between. So you said that we do have similar fossils, which they're like similar. Now, this is interesting to me because I've often heard there are too many gaps in the fossil record. Are you saying now that they're too similar and that we have too many transitional fossils?
Because well, it depends what you mean by transitional. And
correct.
Yeah.
Okay, I think every fossil is a quote transitional fossil. Right. So we do have examples of fossils in a chronological order. For instance, the hominid family, right? Homo habilis all the way down to Homo sapiens, where we've got progressive changes where we become more and more human-like until finally we've got like Homo erectus and then Homo sapiens. Within a chronological order, they're very similar. They're still the same kind. Hominids are still the same kind. And I'm looking at the BioLogos website here, and there's like a Christian position on origins where maybe creation happened and God revealed himself to Adam and Eve, who were maybe some farmers in an early Homo sapiens ground. And depending on how you interpret scripture, that might fit. To me, that's what I would have to accept in order to accept the Bible at this point as evidence. It would have to be consistent with what we understand about evolution. So I want to hear your thoughts. I went off on a tangent. I want to hear your thoughts about.
No, I'd like to respond to that though, if you want, before you go to the next one. No, I was just going to say that, we do look very similar to a lot of different things. If you think about it, think about how many millions of different types of creatures there are, including human beings. Obviously, I'm lumping us in with creatures, but all the different forms of life. There are if you just take a look at what the next similar thing to us is, it would be like an ape or a smaller a big chimp or a small ape.
Chimpanzee is our closest ancestor based on genetics and the anatomical comparisons, plus the fossil record that we do have of ape-like, human-like ancestors. Yeah.
Yeah, and look, and so I like, here's the thing: is when I say it depends on what you mean by transitional fossil, what I mean is this: if you take every little thing that looks similar and go in order, eventually you can get back to looking like something else. But it's like this: it'd be like, say you had a human, and then the next closest thing is some kind of a primate, which we see on Earth today, and the next closest thing to that might be, and I'm going to butcher this, maybe there's something in between, but like a sloth, right? A sloth kind of has that same body frame and all that, different hands, different face a little bit, but it still has that general feel of the arms and the legs and the head and climbing. Or even a koala is similar. Now, these aren't super similar, which obviously I think you agree with that. But the point is, you will always find similar looking animals, and you could branch off in different directions based on what you're looking for hair, for size, for color, for whatever. But the one thing you don't see ever in anything is when we have consciousness and morality and the way we create and build and communicate, it is unlike anything has ever been, and nothing's even remotely close. Like there is nothing even, all animals.
How about Homo erectus using, Homo habilis being the first stone tool users, all the way down to Homo erectus, which had the first hunter-gatherer societies based on the archaeological.
These are also assumptions, though, because
based on the archaeological.
It's not like there's history. It's not like there's history books written or video to show this. This is what we assume over the course of time. We say that the earth is millions of years old and that there were cavemen and that they created fire and that they made sticks and the first wheel and all. We put that in. So there's no history or drawings or any kind of historical evidence to show that that actually did happen. That's what we assume happened based on the order of what we see things play out. So it's assumptions again.
You have a fair criticism about the fossil record. So you're exactly right. But we've got similar anatomical structures, which are chronological in the way that they progress to modern animals today. We don't have Homo habilis around anymore. We have ape-like and monkey-like and human-like, obviously, beings. But we've also got them in chronological order. They've been dated, not by assumptions, by a completely separate field of radiometric dating.
Which is very flawed, by the way.
It can be flawed, and we've got ways to safeguard against that. And again, I'm not an expert in that field, but the experts in that field say, yes, we've cross-referenced that with other methods of dating. And it's consistent with anatomical structure. We can even test genetics for many of these specimens, not all of them, depending on the type of fossil. So then we've also got genetic evidence, and you brought up fairly that we're similarly related to plants, but very distantly. Right. So if you accept that they are distantly related, and we've got all of these non-existent chronological order of humans, for example, it creates this very strong case that they are actually changing over time. So I don't understand. Like you have fair criticisms, right? And if we only had that one line of evidence, but then we cross-reference that with dating, which has its own experts and its own cross-referencing methods within that field. So we've got these two different lines agreeing with each other that evolution happened, that species have changed. There are assumptions within that. And again, my assumption is just that the natural laws that we have today, speciation occurs, right? We observe that. Why hasn't it happened before us? Or why hasn't it continued to happen in the past? I think that's the thing that I'm going to disagree with you. Or I think that may be your biggest issue, is that something had to have changed in order for us to have evolution now or adaptation now, but it didn't happen before. Why is that?
See, well, and I think we always had adaptation. I don't think that that's something new. I think that's why when you talk about evolution, there is actually 6 categories of evolution. There's cosmic, stellar, organic, chemical, macro, and micro. And the one we agree on for sure is microevolution, because essentially all that is adaptation. It's just a variation. We have all these different limitations with it. Like I could be taller as a human. I could also be shorter.
I'm only specific. I'm only talking about biodiversity, the origin of biodiversity.
No, I know. And I don't want to get into like the stellar and all that stuff. I'm just saying that when you said that like we agree or why if I believe this or why I don't believe that. What I'm saying is like I said before, it's a puzzle. And when you said about we do the radiocarbon dating with experts in their field, there's many experts. If you look this up, people at home, you guys can Google this. There are many experts that don't follow radiometric dating because it is widely known throughout the history of time that we've had it. It has failed many times under many circumstances because the environment itself can change what the amount of carbon that comes off of these things. And
So how do they
discover? Like, as a matter of fact, they carbon dated an animal. They carbon dated one animal in 3 different locations. I believe it was either an elephant or it was a furred animal. It wasn't a woolly mammoth, but anyway, they carbon dated. I could give you the link after if you want, but they carbon dated this animal that had just died in 3 different spots and got 3 totally different ages. So it's not so that's one thing. That's one.
So how did they discover that was wrong, and did they correct their estimate for that animal? And by the way, they're all estimates. We can't say what specific year, what day, what month. That's something.
These all go together. This is why I brought this up, is because the fact that we cannot rely on carbon dating to be 100% accurate, or the fact it's not that the testing is the problem. It's the fact that what you're testing, you cannot be 100% sure that it hasn't gone through anything that has created a flaw in the test. So I'm not blaming the testing, and I'm not even blaming the scientists. I'm blaming the fact that the conditions have to be perfect in order for you to get a perfect dating. And a lot of things they have dated that are accurate. But my point is, we can't know for sure that every single, as a matter of fact, water is a big one that damages things. And if you think about the fossil record, like I was saying, my case is about Noah's flood. If every single thing that we test in the fossil record was engulfed in water at some point and then buried, we can't possibly be 100% accurate on our carbon dating. So the fact that people will use the carbon dating, like it's circular logic. They'll say, how do you know how old the layers are? And they'll say, by the fossils that are found in there. And then you go, okay, well, how do you know how old the layers are, or the fossils? And they say, by what layer it's in. And so it's circular reasoning to come up with these ages that we call it. And then when you do DNA testing, what people don't understand about DNA testing, or what they I don't want to say they lack, but it's just that when we say that we can show that things are related, you can't show that they're related. You can show that they're similar. Like when you do a DNA test for your child to show that it's related to you, the reality is you're not actually showing that it's related to you. You're showing that the percentage of similarity is so high that it has to be yours. So it's not like the DNA test will come back and be like, oh yeah, that's your kid. It'll tell you all the similarities in the DNA that make you believe that it has to be your kid. And we do the same thing with the fossil record.
It's a percentage of confidence, right?
Exactly.
I want to respond to the accusation that it's a circular reasoning, because what I'm saying is it's cross-referenced through all this other evidence. So we do have similar beings, which you criticized effectively. Now we've also got this consistent dating that goes along with it, along with we have descending types, right? So you're saying we have a hominid type that gets progressively more modern to modern humans. And it's not saying that there is a goal. It's just genetics is what it is. It's you mentioned before, it's not like nature is actually selecting for things. It's just whatever is beneficial moves on. So we have that genetics mutate. We are there is fossil evidence which is cross-referenced with this dating method of us moving down, along with genetic evidence that they're getting more and more similar to us as we get closer to hominid looking things. That's 3 separate entire fields which are consistent. And so in order for it to actually be circular, you'd have to go with one and say, well, this one is true because it's true in this one field. But I'm saying I've got these other, and you may fairly criticize, okay, this other field is also circular. This other field is circular. This other field is circular. But you take them all 3 and you take out the outliers, which I agree there are going to be outliers, and there's going to be bad science. There's going to be wrongly written papers. They're written by humans. Humans can be wrong and fallible. All of these things help me avoid being 100% certain, right, that evolution occurred. But my level of confidence that it occurred is based on the where they meet. We have all 3 fields, and they meet, and they suggest that we have a common ancestor.
Yeah, and if I can just respond real quick, because I can see you probably want to. Let me just say one thing real quickly I 100% agree with just about everything you just said. We do have different areas of fields, and they all come together. The problem, though, or I don't even want to say it's a problem, but the thing is, You've come to that conclusion, along with many other evolutionists, that all of those are constant and they're unchanging, or that they're accurate and all these things, and that's fine. But what I'm saying is the reasoning that I come up with, or to think of creationism, is because everything that we do see is predicted, or is something that you could predict if you knew that the original Bible story is true. Meaning, like with Noah's Ark, if there was a flood, and if there was all of these animals came to the ark, which is it's hard for a lot of people to believe that story, but let's assume that God led these animals, because if he is God, he could do that. Obviously, I don't think it would be very difficult for him. If he created all of them, I think he could lead them to the ark. But let's just get all that out of the way. So the animals are all on the ark. There's 2 of each kind, male and female, for all the ones that you're not going to eat. There's up to 7 of the animals that they were going to eat because they needed to make food. They were going to be on there for a while. So anyway, once this ark stopped into a specific spot, you had all these dead animals that did not get onto the ark. You had all of these different, which we now see that there's, I mean, I'm sure millions of extinct animals. But the point is, once that water level came back down, the hydrologic sorting would allow these layers or you would see layers in rocks. So what we do see fits that. Then when all of these animals keep reproducing over time, and you get a little bit of a change, like you get brown hair on one. You have 2 dogs, they have 10 kids. One has brown hair, one has white hair, one has a mix of brown and white, one has a little bit grayish. You have all these different variations. Well, then over time, they would then create different things, like what you were talking about with the squirrels. You'll see little changes in the size and the shape and all these things. That is not hard for me to understand or hard to believe. If you take all of that in there, and then you see that the fossil record, every single fossil was engulfed in water and buried, you can see why the carbon dating would be inaccurate, which it is a lot of times. I'm not saying it's always wrong. I'm just saying that there is a lot of flaws in carbon dating. When you look at the age of the Earth, when you look at the layers, we say that this is 10 million year old, this is 50 million, this is 100 million. Well, it doesn't make an ounce of sense why these would be different ages, because they were all on Earth. So unless they were flown in from another planet or from outer space, I don't know why they would be different ages. But you would see layers, the way that the Bible said. You would see a bunch of dead animals that were buried and fossilized because of the way that the pressure and the way that they were buried quickly. You would see that. The denser ones would be at the bottom, which is what you see in the geologic or the fossil record. And you would see these different layers, which now look like different ages of Earth. So all of them line up perfectly with the Bible. So I'm not saying you're wrong, and I'm not saying that you're crazy for thinking what you do. I'm looking at what the Bible says, and I see that it all perfectly lines up. And you're looking at what science books say from evolutionists, and that lines up. So I totally understand why you believe what you do, but I'm just saying the reason why I think that it doesn't line up is because there's many other things that evolution cannot explain, which we can get into next. But just with diversity of animals or diversity of life on this planet, I'd say me and you are equally in the, like, I totally get why you believe what you do. But I think that there's way more that we haven't even touched on yet that just shreds evolution. So I hope that we can get into that as well.
Awesome. And Ben, thank you for conceding your time to me for a moment. I appreciate it. No, the reason why I popped in is, one, because you guys are at time for the open discussion, and there's a lot of questions coming in, but they're getting eaten up by the chat, and we lose the questions in StreamYard. They'll eventually disappear. So some of them are displayed for Adam, but if you can, I'll ask a couple for Adam up top. If you can get a couple of questions in there for Ben as well. So Adam,
yeah.
Do you understand that calling something a squirrel does not mean all things called squirrels are the same species? Squirrel is not the scientific name for it. It's kind of a question and a statement, I guess. So how about
Well, what I'll say to that is that if you notice, like I said, I can't finish or talk about these things without at least including the Bible, because a lot of what you see is mentioned in there. So I do want to make that very well known. Yes, squirrel is not a scientific term. We have created scientific terms over the last hundreds and thousands of years or whatever. We have added things in like phylum And like people, for instance, nobody knew what a bacteria was 2,000 years ago. They couldn't see it. They had no idea that it even existed. Things get added the more time, the more study we do. But just because a scientist gives something a scientific name doesn't mean that it makes what I'm saying any less relevant. Like a squirrel is a squirrel. A squirrel was called a squirrel a long time before all the different what phyla of it or whatever, all the different species of squirrel, we come up with different things so we can name stuff. So scientists do that, and that's okay. But the point that I'm trying to make is still the same. When you see a wolf, you see a Chihuahua, you see a Great Dane, you see a Dalmatian and a Pit Bull. What are they? They're all dogs, and we all know that. So is that a scientific name? No, it's not a scientific name. But my child knows that it's called a dog, and I think anybody on the planet that speaks English, if you pointed at a dog and said that's a dog, they would go, "Yep." So that's the best. I mean, that's the best I can do as far as the scientific names that we come up with.
That's fair enough. I also wanted to acknowledge Anna Tucker in the chat. I know we had David Gonzalez earlier, conservative Christian. We do have a few Christians in the chat, so we do appreciate anybody that comes in, and be mindful. I know a lot of times it's hard to differentiate comments because it's written down. A lot of our regulars in the chat are sarcastic, they're being silly, and they're poking fun, but they are good people. So just be mindful of the people that you're commenting with. Some people may not understand your humor, and be respectful at the same time. Let's take a look here. There's another question I saw for you, Adam. From Geo Sam, my good buddy Geo Sam. Where did it go? What's your favorite color? No, I'm kidding.
Blue. It's even in the picture on the screen. Might even be the same shirt.
Might be the same one. Okay.
Could be. See. I got a lot of off colors, like a little pastels, if you will.
And I know I got some advice or some help earlier from Emo. He goes by the name Emo online. And I wanted to make sure that I thanked him, even though I didn't use, call me Emo. I didn't use much of the material about plants, partially because I'm not super familiar. I read through a little bit of that information today, and totally check out his channel. Call me Emo for plant phylogeny and why plants demonstrate a descent. So that's interesting to check out.
Is it Call Me Emo?
Yeah, that's the username.
Shout out, Call Me Emo.
Yeah.
Call Me Emo.
Thank you.
Where did it go?
Even though I didn't use most of that information.
You know what? I need Murder Shed Steve. Where's Murder Shed Steve at, man? I'm trying to find these gosh darn questions. Murder Shed Steve. He's probably off murdering somebody.
If you don't have one, one just popped up at the bottom of the feed for me.
Go. Okay. Hey, I'll pop it up. Adam, I'm sorry, buddy. I did see one for Adam. I want to. Oh, you know what? It did just come back up. Geo Sam, thank you, buddy. And I'll get that one for Adam. Let me give you this one here. Adam. It says, how does Adam explain the 500,000-year-old artifacts that have been found on Earth?
I think I kind of got into that a little bit with Ben, is that we assume that they're a million based on the carbon date or the radiometric dating that we do. There is no it's not time stamped. So we know that they're definitely there could be some variation within the time frame there. My point is, I don't think that it is. And so if you could prove, now if the only thing that we use is carbon dating or radiometric, doesn't have to be carbon. I know I get eaten up a lot. That's just the most common, guys. So when I say carbon dating, I don't mean that's the only dating system we have. But no, when we use radiometric dating, it is known to be flawed. There are many scientists that do carbon date or radiometric dating that will flat out prove that they'll admit that they can't rely on it all the time. Things have to be in perfect conditions. And like I said, if this artifact that you're speaking of, say it was underwater for any length of time, that is going to totally throw things off. People that know, I can't remember the term that it's called because, like Ben, I'm not an expert in this stuff. I know enough, I guess, to get me by, or maybe I don't. I guess that we'll let the people in the comments decide that. Yeah. But no, there's a term that you can't, almost anything that is in water, you cannot use carbon dating or radiometric dating for those things because the water throws things off so much. So the whole point that I'm getting at is if Noah's flood is true, which I firmly believe it is, I think there's evidence all over the place. We can get into that another time. But I do believe that everything except for this ark and these 8 people and these animals that were on the ark were covered in water at some point. I mean, think about how many.
I have an objection here on that point. And I think Bill Nye may have brought it up in the Nye Ham debate, where did water mess with the fossils that were concealed by rock that we've uncovered? So what about all the fossils which would not have been exposed, like would have been under the ocean floor of the flood? You know,
why would there be fossils under the ocean floor? Like, if think about it, if the water,
so let's say, hold on.
Well, let me go through the story, and I'll do it as quickly as I possibly can, because I think if you understand what actually, or at least what I believe happened, if you understand what the thought is or what the story says, then you'll see what I mean by this. There wouldn't be any fossils underneath the ocean floor. What it says is that all the animals that were on land, whatever the sea level was, the water from under the ocean floor broke open. It says the fountains broke open from the deep. The water came rushing up. We do now know within the last 30, 40 years, we've discovered that there is water underneath the ocean floor. That is science that's in the Bible that people have never known up until I believe the 70s or 80s. But anyway, that being said, the water came from underneath the earth and it rose up on top of it raining. So all these animals that were above the water on land, they were never under the ocean floor. What they did is when the water came up, let's say it went up 100, well, it went up above Mount Everest, but it does say that the rocks in the mountains shifted and moved too. So that doesn't mean that the water was above 5 miles above what we have now. It just means that things have shifted and moved, but the water did cover everything. So no land animal would have survived. They would have been floating and flopping around in the water until they drowned or got eaten or whatever and died.
Were there not like blocks of crust then? So I don't have, so let's say that the crust did break open and then water rained over top of it. What about all those blocks of rock layers, which undoubtedly would have already existed? And then we have all the fossils within that rock layer. And I'm having to follow you into this argument, which I still don't think there's evidence for the flood. And I encourage everyone to go to biologos.org. It's a Christian organization which talks about why the flood most likely didn't occur. And we have all these layers of crust. Even if everything was engulfed by water, how does that take apart the idea that there are probably fossils within? Not probably. We have fossils that have been uncovered through layers and layers of rock.
Well, first, 99% of rocks don't float. They go right to the bottom. So I don't know what they would be floating on exactly. Now,
they'd be within the water. They'd be underwater.
What, underwater?
Yeah, you'd have like miles and miles of crust of rock, which is engulfed by water. And then within that rock, you have fossils.
Well, yeah, but then what I'm saying is these animals would be, all these dead animals that were land animals, they would have been in the water. They would have been engulfed in the water. They would have been floating around. And as the water layer started to come down and everything was shaking less and everything was coming back down, that's where you start seeing the layers form.
So layers didn't form until after the flood? I'm sorry, I'm interrupting a lot.
No. What I'm trying to say is that what we see in the rock layers is what was, like if you took sand and shook it all up in water, you'd see murky looking water because there would be sand particles and things everywhere. That's what it looked like in the flood. How
long do you think it takes for rock to form?
Not long. We've seen them form under certain pressures and different examples. We've seen rocks form very quickly. They have machines right now that you can do this.
Do you know about
metamorphosis? It doesn't take rock millions and millions of years to form. We've proven that. There's actually machines that you can make this happen. You can make your own rocks. It only I can't remember. It takes way less than years, but it takes a certain condition and certain pressures, which would have been very prominent all over the world at that time. So it's not very difficult for me to believe that that when the water was above everything. I mean, think about it like this. We know right now that the water level was at some point lower. I think you'd be insane to think that it wasn't, because we have so many coastal cities that are 100 feet underwater right now. Now, I mean, unless you believe in Aquaman and you think that there's just a whole race of people living underwater, these cities were at one point in time above the water. So that shows that the water level has come up. Now you can say it's from glaciers and things like that, which I'm sure that was part of it too.
Like tectonics and
all that stuff. Same thing with Everest. It never said that Everest has never moved. I mean, we know that plate tectonics shift and things come up and rise and all that stuff. The point is, though, is that these things do not take millions and billions of years to form. We have machines that can make rocks right now. Now, I don't know the exact time, so I don't want to be called out on that later, but it does not take millions or even hundreds of years to do this. You can
under natural pressures that would take longer with natural processes.
It could.
Like,
and listen, here's the thing. Even if, say it normally would take millions of years, which I don't believe it does. I think we can do, I've already said that you can do this at your own time. Even if it did, is it very unlikely, if God did have this flood and God did exist, is it very hard to believe that God could have sped this up?
I still think half of Christians don't even accept that proposition. Not that that's an indicator that it actually happened. There isn't evidence that a global flood occurred. And
of course there's tons of it. Now,
you're pointing out flaws.
Is different than evidence.
There are flaws.
Different than evidence, though. Because evidence just means that there is evidential support for it, which there is tons of. I think if you're a Christian and you think that there's no evidence for a flood, you're insane. But there's tons of evidential support. Now, is there proof that it happened? I would never say that it's a guaranteed, definitely, no doubt about it thing happened, because I couldn't hand you something that proves it. But I think if you look around, there's more than enough evidence that shows that it's very likely. In fact, China wrote about the Yellow River flooding, and they said it went above their highest peaks. And they dated it back to somewhere between 4,000 to 4,500 years ago. And if you follow the lineage in the Bible, Noah's flood happened 4,400 years ago, roughly, give or take 100 years. So even China wrote in their history the exact same thing. Now, they didn't call it a global flood, but they did say it's above their highest peaks. So it obviously was very, very high up. And they talk about it in their history, and they even date it to the exact same time that Noah's flood was dated to happen in the Bible. So I think there's overwhelming evidence that this flood happened. You don't have to believe it. I don't have proof that I can hand you, but it explains why we see fossils all over the world. It explains why we see dinosaurs all over the world. It explains why we see layers in rock. It explains why we see cities that are underwater as we speak. It explains why China wrote about it. It explains why several historic ancient cultures wrote about it all over the world. There is overwhelming evidence that this happened, but I can't prove that it happened. That's the difference.
Well, the last thing I'll say here before, I don't know if Paul's is going to interject here, but we've got, I want to make sure that we understand that because it has explanatory power doesn't mean that it actually happened.
100%.
And then there's a difference between proof and evidence, which is consistent with.
Couldn't agree more.
So I want to make sure that we have those distinctions. And so then that's why I did bring up in my opening statement, if you're just joining us, if you're joined in halfway through, I hope you rewatch the opening statement. I talked about some assumptions that one has to make. In order to accept that evolution by natural selection occurred, the only assumption you have to make is that natural laws are consistent throughout the past 2.5 billion years. It's a very modest assumption. All of the other evidence, coexist with each other. And throughout this debate, I feel like we've done a pretty good job parsing out levels of confidence and whether or not those levels of confidence are justified.
Absolutely. And Ben, kudos, man, for putting on the sport jacket. You look like a proper news anchor, and it's about time we had some good-looking members of TART, because Austin isn't cutting it, man. Hey, I want to bring up a question from David Gonzalez, good friend of ours. And he asks, what do you think is the best evidence for your position on evolution?
The best evidence that we have for the position on evolution, I would go to my first two bits of evidence that I've got. And that's why when we started the open discussion, I just started making sure that we agreed that genes randomly mutate. They're not always beneficial. In fact, most of the mutations are not beneficial. And then in order to survive and reproduce, you have to pass on your genes. And so that alone demonstrates that it's likely that animals will change over time. And again, Adam has graciously accepted that adaptation occurs and that we do have speciation that occurs today. But the added assumptions then is that there was a cataclysmic event at some point in the past, which discredits the rest of the evidence that I have. So the very best evidence that I have that is regardless of a cataclysmic event is that genes randomly mutate, and in order to survive and pass on your genes, organisms have to survive in order to pass on their genes. And based on that, you've got natural selection, which are pressures from the natural world, which select for, and it's not random, they select for certain phenotypes, and then artificial selection, just humans selecting for things like dog breeds or cow breeds. To me, those are the two best bits of evidence, and you don't have to have a fossil record to make that predictions about the fossil record. And I had somebody ask me, what is my profession? Unfortunately, I'm not an expert, so don't take my opinion on it. Go to biologos.org, talkorigins.org, and go to the, I love the Human Origins Project from the Smithsonian. So all really detailed information is there. So that's where I've learned a lot.
All right, well, we got another question for Adam. Did you know many other religions also have flood myths, and all of them are most likely talking about local floods, not a global flood? What are your views on that?
Oh, my mic is, there we go. Is that all right? We're back. No, yeah, I don't follow those other religions. So, and I did like the way you worded that there was good, because you said they have flood myths. So it's in the question, it's built in to assume that this is just a mythical story, that it didn't happen. I do love when questions are put like that, but the reality is this, man, you don't have to take my word for it. I can't prove that there was a flood. I'm just saying there is overwhelming evidential support for it. And there's a difference. Ben nailed it. He said there is a huge difference between evidential support or evidence and proof. Proof shows you that something is definitely true without a doubt. That's proof that something happened. Evidence is the things that you collect to build your case. So it's a very big difference. Now, I'm saying there is a ton of evidential support. I can't show you that there was a flood. What I will say is, over in Turkey, around Mount Ararat, it's not on Mount Ararat, that's a common misconception, but around that area there is a village, and I cannot remember, for the life of me I can't remember the name of the village, but in its translation it means village of 8. And what happened when Noah's flood, when they landed in that exact same region and they got off, there was 8 of them. Now I'm not saying that that's proof. I'm not saying that alone does anything. What I am saying is, very ironic that in the exact same location that the ark supposedly landed, there's a city that is based around, it's being called the Village of 8. Then we see the layers inside of rock all over the world, up to its highest layers. It is a proven fact that there are fossilized seashells on top of Mount Everest. Now, I don't know how the seashells climbed up there. I didn't think they could climb. But the point is, there is evidence all over the world for this flood. You don't have to believe it. Don't take my word for it. I just purely believe in it so much because the Bible, not only does the Bible say it, I don't just blindly believe what the Bible says. I have spent my entire life finding research, or doing research and finding evidence for what it says, because if it's not, you don't just go in believing something because it sounds sweet and fun, or you shouldn't. At least you should at least challenge these things to logically line up, to not contradict themselves. And what I have found with research and the Bible and history and science and all these things is that the Bible has not one thing that is proven to be false. You have a lot of things that can't be proven, or a lot of things that are believed to be false, but I have not seen, to this day, I have yet to hear one person prove a single sentence in the Bible is false. So that gives it a lot of credibility, in my opinion. Then seeing all the different evidences around the world. If a global flood happened, what would you expect to see to a bunch of land-dwelling animals? You would expect to see them dead and buried and fossilized. It's not, that's obviously, I think anybody would say that if you did see a global flood, that is very expected. If the earth was shaken up the way that it claims that it was in the Bible, and the fountains broke open from as a matter of fact, if you guys look on Google Earth right now, because I just did this not this long ago and it was beautiful, it was amazing. You can actually see in the ocean, at the floor, you can see like just hundreds or thousands of fracture lines. We call them fault lines, or where the earthquake, where the plate tectonics move and all that. And that's fine. You can look at it like that. But that we see, there's certain spots. I don't know if you guys have ever seen that Planet Earth show or whatever, but they've had robots like 5-6 miles down into the ocean, and there's these vents of steam coming up. There's vents of what is under the earth. Like all these things that the Bible has predicted, we've either found throughout time, or even just recently we've discovered to be true. So putting all of that together, I think shows me that the Bible is legitimately true. I have never seen anything do anything other than adapt or speciation, where, like, yeah, you might have different color people, but they're still humans. You have different sized dogs, they're still dogs. You have different color haired squirrels, they're still squirrels. We have never seen a non squirrel give birth to a squirrel. We've never seen a non dog give birth to a dog. We've never seen a non human, and so on and so on and so on. The point is, all of these things are assumptions in evolution. I firmly believe that we adapt and that we change and we have different heights. We have different limitations within the kind. I just have never had any logical reason for believing that a giraffe has slowly stretched its neck over time to get to the leaves that weren't eaten yet, but no other animal on earth ever thought to do that. It's only the giraffes that were smart enough to stretch its neck out to get to the taller leaves. Every other animal was like, I guess we're dead. So
Hey, you ever seen two giraffes fight? It's quite the interesting thing.
But
No,
just
but
to sum
hey,
it
I
up,
want
there's so many holes in it. We haven't even gotten into morality or the existence of life and consciousness, which I would
Sure.
love to dive into that at some point.
I want to point
Ben,
out.
Ben, just before you jump in, I wanted to get this last one in, and then we can segue over. You can have the floor.
Okay.
I do want to preface, though, my buddy John Anthony, and go check John Anthony's channel out as well. It's called John Anthony. I think
Easy to remember.
I think it's that. But John Anthony has Tourette's, so you do have to excuse my friend John. His question is, how did they write about it if they were all killed by the flood, Adam?
They had to do the exact same thing as they did in the beginning. They had to populate, and a lot of people hate hearing about how they had to populate, but it does involve incest. Unfortunately, if you think about it, no matter how any human ever got here, it
Gotcha.
had to be incest, because you would have to rely on two deformed non-humans to
Right.
give birth to two humans that weren't related, and then they had to find each other. One had to be male, one had to be female, and they had to mate. So no matter how you slice it up,
Right.
it had to, unfortunately, and I know a lot of people don't like hearing it, and I don't even like saying it, but unfortunately, the only way to populate the earth when there were only one or two of you is to keep mating with each other in your own family. Thank God we don't have to do that now. But the point is,
Fair enough.
after this flood happened, if you know the story, if you know the Bible, around, I want to say 900 to 1,000 years later, I may be off on the time, so don't hold me to that, but around that time later was the Tower of Babel, or Babel, however you pronounce. I've heard it pronounced both ways.
I think it's
But anyway,
Babel. I'm not sure.
it could be, maybe it's Babel.
I like saying Babel because it sounds like the word we use today.
Yeah, exactly. And that's how I've always heard it. But then when I got older, I heard people say Babel and stuff. And it's just like when we always heard Uranus, and then they were like, no, it's Uranus, because they didn't want to say your anus. So, but anyway, the point is, years and years and years later, after all the repopulating, or not the repopulating of the world, but after the populating grew and grew and grew, then the Tower of Babel happened, where God claims that he separated people. He separated not only their race, their color, but their tongue, their language.
So were the Chinese there at the flood?
No.
To witness the flood? So how did they know that a global flood occurred?
Because these legends get just like we do in today. Just like,
do we trust legends that are told today all the time?
Do we what?
Do we trust legends today?
We trust a lot of them. I mean,
how
trust
confident?
all the legends of George Washington and Christopher Columbus and all that.
Ooh. Are those legends, or do we have original firsthand accounts from those people, multiple, and then they're cross-referenced?
Just a minute ago, you were telling me about cavemen and how they came up with fire. We have no documentation of that either. But you
tools. We have tools that are fossilized tools with those beings, and we can infer from that they were the first people. I mean, where else did tools come from? Were they placed next to those people? Potentially,
people made them.
People made them. Oh, like Homo sapiens. So why don't we have evidence of Homo sapiens before 300,000 years ago? There were no Homo sapiens before in the fossil record, and then we don't have Homo habilis after about 5 million years ago, somewhere in that range. So
I'm glad this is a good point that you brought up. I didn't even think we were going to get to this part, but this is.
Hey, let me jump out of here, guys. Hey, guys, I'm going to back out to let you guys go on. I think we're done with the questions for now. If you guys see one that you like, pop it up. But I'm going to back out and let you guys go to the final round. Okay.
Yeah. How long do you want to have this section go?
Well, I actually was going to turn that over to you, Ben, because I know you're probably the least.
I get exhausted easily.
Yeah. So you
tell me. I thought you guys had another show and stuff anyway, so I didn't know how long you guys even wanted to do this.
We were hoping to hog you and keep you on for the next show, Adam.
I'm in, baby. I'm in.
But Ben, however, you let me know when you're ready to pop out. I think we
Okay.
could run for about 15:30. It's up to you.
That sounds right. That sounds good. Yeah. Well, so now we've got this huge gap in the archaeological record. We have Homo habilis with up to about 7 million years ago, between 5 and 7 millions. Huge gap of possible range where that species could have been there, because radiometric dating at that distance in time is only so accurate, right? But we have fossils, and I'm not exactly sure what type of tools they had, very primitive tools, stone tools, but they're found with those fossilized skeletons, and there's no Homo sapiens found within that same type of whether it was rock or I think it was Chad. Anyway, there's other early evidence, and I have to trust the experts there, right? Because I'm not an expert. I have to trust what's coming out of that field. So that's why there is a trust element in that, where my confidence is not 100%, but it's consistent with my understanding with everything else. What would you say about that gap between 5 million years ago and 300,000 years ago? How did humans put stuff there?
Well, there you see, you have to put in the assumptions. You have to rely on carbon dating to be accurate, radiometric dating to be accurate, which you just admitted yourself, even that far back you can't be. So now you're making an assumption that these ages are true, which you just admitted they can't be accurate.
They're within a range.
We don't know.
They're within a range.
Sure, but what I'm saying is we don't know that these people were different ages apart, that they were 300,000 years ago. We don't even know if the Earth is that old, because for a very long time, if you guys can look this up, they changed the age of the Earth and the universe over and over and over and over the last couple hundred years. They kept changing how old we thought everything was, because the math wouldn't work out right. So they had to keep changing things. The only point I'm trying to get at with that is we can't be positive that or radiometric dating is accurate, especially that far back. We can't be sure that these people didn't exist at the same time. We just assume that they didn't because of the geologic column and the fossil record and all these things. All of these things that
I don't know how that's an assumption. If we do have that,
we don't know that the age is what you're saying it is. So to say that that these people lived 5 million years ago and these people were 300,000, you don't know that. We have no way of knowing for sure that that is accurate. Now, assume that you are right. Assume that that this is definitely true. It's 5 million, 300 million. What are you saying, that these people, that these fossils or skeletons that had tools, are they not human? I know you said they're not Homo sapien, but are they human?
Excellent question. So this is where the Human Origins Project at Smithsonian Institute can come into play. They did have very different anatomical structure. They had very different lengths of arms and legs compared to the thorax, the rib cage, hip bones. They would have had the ability to walk on 2 legs, these Homo habilises, but they would not have the ability to walk long distances on 2 legs, based on the evidence that we have about the pelvis and I think the skull they found. So they are bone fragments, which there's enough evidence given those fragments of the fossilized fragments of bones, we can infer from that a lot of information. And I think it's a huge assumption to say that they would be humans 7 million years ago, given that there's not any other Homo sapien-like ancestors or species around that time. They're so different from the rest of the chronology of human origins that it would be very unlikely that they were humans.
Is it possible that they are primates and not humans?
Primates and humans would have shared a common ancestor, and so this Homo habilis presents an option, a possible common ancestor. Where I'm not saying that they are. There could have been more other species that we haven't found any evidence of yet, and we don't know if we are directly descended for them or if that's a possible ancestor. Good question.
You know that there's millions of extinct animals that we've never seen. I mean, not that we've never seen, but we have fossils for and all these things that they don't exist today, that me and you have never seen in person.
99% or more of the animals. Correct.
So is it possible that these were either non-human or that they were human, but they just happened to be different, like you said, they were either taller, shorter, they had different, the ratio of arms to legs and all that stuff? Because right now we see different we see different humans with different ratio. Like, for instance, my dad's got a really short lower half. He's got a taller torso. like my mom has longer legs and a shorter torso. Even though I'm short, I have longer legs and a longer torso. I'm taller than both of them. That does not mean that
This
it's evolution.
is pretty extreme. And it's
what I'm saying though is that it's possible that these were either different types of human that were also human, but just different looking or whatever, just like we see on Earth today. Or it's possible that these weren't even human at all, that they were different types of primates, but they were very, very, very similar, which is what we see now, just not as similar as that was. So all I'm saying is just because we put dates next to them and we say that it's accurate and we say that these are Homo, different other names, but they're still human, that doesn't mean that these could not coexist. It doesn't mean that humans evolved from one another, from those things. You're to make the assumption that a human being evolved from that just because that was dated farther back. That's assumptions that have to be made, and
So
there's no proof that we've never seen anything like that.
So I will say Homo habilis being around 5 to 7 million years ago, very unhuman-like. The only human-like characteristics would have been the type of teeth that they had is consistent with hominids, which followed, right? So after Homo habilis, we have the Australopithecus group, which we didn't directly descend from, but they split off from that Homo group. And then we've got other hominids, which descend from that similar timescale. So up to about 3-4 million years ago, we have other hominids appear in the fossil record, which have moved along. So now we've got hominids with longer legs. We've got a little bit better shaped pelvis for more walking. And they are still not human. They're incredibly unhuman. However, there's a progression that happens up to Homo erectus and eventually Homo sapiens. And so we've got more and more examples of specimens for each species. And we have groups of specimens of different fossils. And you made it, and I want to make this one more point that imagine if all the humans on Earth died and only one random human being, Homo sapien fossil survived. In 3 million years, is it more or less likely that that random human would be an anomaly of Homo sapiens? Even if we had only one of any species, I think it's likely that out of a population of several hundred or several thousand or 100,000, if only one specimen survived, I think it's I think it's more probable that that would be a consistent or more of an average example. So that would be my response to the point that you brought up, that it could be an anomaly of a human. It could just be an incredibly chimpanzee-like human being.
Well, yeah, and I guess what I'm saying is it's for me, it's not out of the realm of possibility that these, Homo non-sapiens, whatever these other things are that were very close to humans, but even the ones that you said were far distant from human, it's very possible to think that those were just like primates. They were a different form of primates, just like an ape or a chimp or something, and maybe they lived on Earth amongst humans, just like all the other animals did. And when that flood happened, it killed all of those things that aren't human, because obviously if the flood story is true, which I believe it is, then only those 8 survived anyway. So whether they were human or they were non-human, it doesn't really change anything as far as the Bible goes. And then when you submerge all that in water, I showed you admitted that it will alter the dating or the accuracy of the dating.
Essentially, I'm not an expert in that field, and I don't know what kind of I don't know what kind of safeguards they have against that. Or
all I'm saying is,
I don't know if that's a fair criticism.
I'm just saying that it's very possible that these non-humans that you speak of, you're saying, see, we're both making assumptions here. So I'm not knocking you for an assumption at all. I'm making one too. Your assumption is that humans evolved from those things. My assumption is that they lived at the same time as humans, and when the flood happened, it wiped all of them out. Everything that looks close to a human that's not human, everything that's ape-like that would be on the Earth, you would see tons of skeletons and fossils for any plant, animal, all these things that are not water-dwelling animals, because I don't think anything that lived in the water was necessarily going to be fossilized. I mean, if it died, maybe, but my point is, whales and all that are not going to be scared of a flood. They're in a living flood all the time. So, but the point is that I'm getting at is that it's very possible that these things that were similar to animal or humans, if they were not humans, they probably didn't have the consciousness that we do. They probably just existed like primates and apes. Maybe they were shorter apes. Like instead of being big, bulky massive ones, maybe they had more of an ape and chimp combo. You know what I'm saying? Like maybe shorter, thinner, but still around us.
Which
don't
lends
know.
credence to the idea that they could have been an ancestor for all of those. Because all of us are not non-Homo habilis, right? We're part of the Homo habilis kind.
Right. Well, this is where we have a
all
problem with these
apes
scientific
and
terms.
humans would be a Homo habilis kind, which is a mammal kind, which goes back to my opening statement that, we go back, and I know I've kind of talked about this hairpin curve or turns in evolution, where just because you have breakoffs from that lineage can continue. Doesn't always, and sometimes you evolve out of that lineage completely. Sorry, I cut you off, but I wanted to make that point that is perfectly consistent with what I've put forward.
Yeah, but also everything that I laid out for you is perfectly consistent with what I put forward. Like if there was a flood, if these you admitted yourself that there are millions of different animals that we have never seen on Earth live in person because they're already extinct. My point is, you don't know that these things that are distant human, but they're not human, they're primate of some kind. You're making the assumption that we evolved from them, so therefore we have to be. No, I'm saying, or I'm sorry, not you specifically, but in evolution theory, we see all these different animals that are Homo something that look human-ish, but they're closely related to primates as well. And all I'm saying is all of these things, they could either be different sized humans with different, we see people right now in different villages all over the world that have their heads are a little bit different. The structure is different. The facial features are a little different. People over in Israel are typically a shorter people. It doesn't mean that you can't have tall ones or whatever, but it doesn't mean that we've evolved from them because we're taller either. So we see different variations within all kinds of humans. Just because you see a skull or a skeleton of something that looks similar to a human doesn't mean that it is. And even if it was, doesn't mean that they're so close. On certain cases, they're so close that maybe they were just different looking, but they were still human.
So here's I don't want to allow you to continue making a straw man out of my argument. So I want to correct you on my opinion about these organisms that we found, the specimens that we do have. I do not contend that we came from these specimens. These specimens are evidence that there were non-human, human-like beings at that time. It's perfectly possible that our direct lineage was independent of these other specimens that we found. We found that that's the case with the Australopithecus group. We understand that Australopithecus did not directly lead to Homo sapiens. All right. It's perfectly possible that every specimen that we had died before producing offspring, right? They would have been different from their parents, and that anyway, it's perfectly possible that there were several different species living at the time of each of these specimens. The evidence that this actually is, and the fact that this actually is, that there were non-humans who were human-like and could have coexisted with other non-humans who were our direct ancestors. Now, I'm not saying that any of the ones that we found necessarily are. Does that make sense? I want to make sure that I correct you, that I don't think necessarily that we came from them.
No. And I was misunderstanding. I thought you were basically saying that humans evolved from those things. So that's
we don't know. We don't know that.
It's my fault for assuming. I thought that that's what you were trying to say. So let me be clear about
that. But I would say that the theory points to the fact that there was a ancestor that would have been at least similar to those beings.
Yeah. Well, we see, and this is why I brought up earlier about how similar we are to apes.
Mm-hmm.
We share right now. You see humans living amongst the same animals that are similar. They look like humans, shaped like humans. The DNA is 99% the same as humans.
Mm-hmm.
That does not mean that we evolved from them, obviously. And I know you're not saying that.
Yeah.
And also, all I'm saying about that is that look at how similar they look. Mm-hmm. That does not mean that all I'm saying is that kind of proves my point that you can have different similar looking animals on Earth at the same time as humans, or even say there wasn't humans yet, right? Just to make your point, say there was no humans. Well, there's all these human looking animals that are not human. I don't see how that changes anything about what I'm saying. If humans existed, I mean, all you're showing is fossils or skeletons of animals that are similar to humans. Now, the only problem that we're having though, really, is that that the dating. You're saying that one is 5 million years old or 7 million, one's 300,000 and all these. We don't know that. That is not and we can't know that that's an accurate dating. And even if it was, that doesn't change anything.
This
like,
is a good.
Still does not mean that humans evolved from anything.
So this brings up another point. This was a question actually in the comments a little bit earlier from the Oh God of Hangovers about 10 minutes ago. He said, as they found lower or earlier in parts of the fossil record. So you were talking about if you shake some water with some sand in it, the heaviest bits would fall to the bottom, right?
Mostly, yeah, mostly, but not 100%. It's not perfect. Yeah, you're going to have some fluctuation, some variation, but yeah, it's not going to be every single dense thing is going to be right at the bottom, and it's not a perfect thing because of what the conditions that were being laid out. But yes, typically the majority of what you're going to see is density. To the heavier objects are going to be towards the bottom. Right, and so I think it's borderline sarcastic, but I think it makes a point. Is just like, are trilobites heavier than T-Rexes? Was the question there? I have no idea. And I would honestly say I'm just as much of an expert as you.
Okay. All right. Okay. Well, I was going to say trilobites are like kind of like sand crabs, is my understanding, that they're much smaller organisms. But my point would be that within layers where we find trilobites, we find other organisms that are that same size. We never find examples. Well, trilobites might be a bit bad example, but they're because they lasted for so long, because trilobites as a species lasted for a very long time.
Were they a water-dwelling animal? I can't remember if the trilobite was a water-dwelling animal or not.
Yeah, based on my understanding, I'm not entirely sure.
Well, see, in anything that lives in the water, anything that is a water-dwelling animal is going to throw all of this off, because they're not one, if they live in the water, the flood is not going to kill them. They're not going to drown in a flood if they live in the water. Now, I don't know about the trilobite thing. I've heard the name, but honestly, I couldn't tell you for the life of me what it looks like off the top of my head. All I'm saying is if it's a water-dwelling animal and you happen to see it in a low level, all that means is that when the columns were sorting, not the columns, but the layers were sorting, that they got buried. It doesn't mean that they necessarily were the heaviest or the densest. It just means that that's where they normally reside. And when they get buried, when things get buried on top of it, like for like any animal that dwells at the bottom of the ocean, I guarantee you're going to find them at the lowest point, because that's where they live, is at the very bottom. So you're not.
But there's layers of rock under the ocean. Do you agree?
You say what?
There's layers of rock under the ocean.
Yeah, but then there's water underneath that. Yeah.
Sure, but I mean, we've got miles and miles and miles, and I don't think the water is encapsulating the core of the Earth underneath the oceans. I'm not super familiar, but I wouldn't assume that there's an extra layer of water between the Earth's crust and the deeper layers of rock, and then magma and the deep core. I mean, it's been years since I took 4th grade Earth sciences, but like.
Well, no, scientists have discovered that there is water underneath the ocean floor. It's not that it's not that it's, I mean, maybe it's a layer. Maybe it's a layer, and maybe the rock, maybe that's why the rock in our plate tectonics moves so much, because if they were sitting on top of water, that would mean that rock would be soft, because it would be softer and more likely to be able to shift and move. I'm not saying it is, because dude, I have no idea. Yeah. I'm just saying that I could totally see why that would happen logically, because if you did have if you did have a whole foundation of rock sitting on top of water and there was cracks in it, it's going to flow a little bit. There's going to be some give and some pull. So you're going to have movement. Now, to what level or degree, dude, I have no idea. I'm not an expert at that. I'm just saying it does make sense to me that would happen.
Well, let's see. I was trying to figure out, I know like there's a lot of stuff that I'm missing. I know that there's a lot of contradictions that I would have liked to bring up. I can go back to my notes real quick from earlier. I know we talked about like plate tectonics a little bit. As you said, that you can look at those fractures as plate tectonics if you want, but this is an extra, I mean, it's a whole separate, again, it's another field of experts saying like, this is how mountains form. This is how rocks form. Like, this is the whole reason why some fossils we will never have, because they would have been, according to the geologic time span, a lot of the rocks would have been pushed under the crust, and only the oldest rocks that we have would be able to show evolution to a certain point, or only the oldest rocks would have the oldest, most primitive fossils. And to my knowledge, that's been consistent as well. What's your understanding of plate tectonics and like the amount of time that would take? Like, were the land masses, did the land masses always look like this from God's creation? I'm interested in your idea there.
Dude, that's a great question. That's phenomenal, Ben. Because here's why. People don't get this. This is so wild how many people never understand this at all about Earth. The map that's sitting right behind you, I didn't even realize how perfect it was. That map. All right, now what people don't realize, they say, like you just nailed it. You said, did the land mass always look like this? The answer, of course, is no. It couldn't possibly have always looked like that. And here's why. What people don't get about the landmass, it's not rocks that's sitting on top of water floating. It is ground that is attached to the earth.
Oceans are just like big lakes, right?
Yeah, the only thing that changes the shape of our continents is the sea level. And people don't get that. I don't know how they don't see that, but it's the truth. If you lowered the water level, and look this up, because I believe it's either 100 or 150 feet. That's all it would take. That's all it would take. If you lowered the water level 100 to 150 feet, you could literally walk to every single continent on Earth. The water between the Philippines is like, I want to say they said like 70 feet deep or something like that at the deepest. The entire Philippines Islands would be one gigantic landmass that connects China to Australia if you just lowered the sea level like 100 feet. So people don't get that. And that explains perfectly why we have a ton of cities that are underwater, that are right on the coasts. Why? Because the sea level's higher. Now, if you lowered the sea level 150 feet, do you think America would look exactly the same? Of course not. Not even close. As a matter of fact, if you lowered it 100 feet, I doubt you would connect Hawaii, because I'm sure it gets a lot deeper than 100 feet between California and Hawaii. But the point still stands that if you just lowered the sea level or raised it, if you raised the sea level like during a flood or something, then these land masses would be tiny. And if you lowered the sea level 7 miles, you wouldn't have water. You would just have one gigantic mantle. So I hope I didn't go off on a tangent. I don't even remember the question. I just had to make that point because so many people don't get that.
All right, so post flood, were kangaroos on the flood?
On the flood?
On the ark. On the ark, thank you.
On the ark, yeah.
Okay, sure. Kangaroos were on the ark.
Yeah.
All right. We're somewhere here in the Mediterranean. How did kangaroos? So you'd agree then that there's water breaking up Australia. I'm sorry, I'm not talking to the mic. You'd agree that there's water breaking up Australia and like the south of India. How did kangaroos get there?
Because like I said, the water level was lower before.
Before the flood?
Yeah, and after. You see, when the flood happened, the water went up so high, then it lowered and lowered and lowered and lowered, which is why you have cities that are underwater. Eventually, over time, maybe it's because of the glaciers, maybe it's from rain, maybe God just feels like it. I don't know. But over time, the water level has risen. We know that because we can see cities that are underwater to this day. We have relics, we have skeletons, we have all kinds of stuff that show that the cities that are underwater clearly at one point weren't underwater. So obviously the sea level was a lot lower. Do I know when the sea level raised up? No, I have no idea. I don't know the exact date. I just know that when the water rose, it said that it came back down. Land masses have settled. And also, like you said about the plate tectonics shifting and moving things. But all I'm saying is after the flood, I believe, can I prove it? No. So you might as well not even ask. But I believe that the water level was low enough to where kangaroos, whenever they got off the ark, everything. This is why there's animals on every single continent, because at one point the water level was low enough for things to be able to walk to every continent. Like I said, if you lowered it 150 feet, you could literally go to any single continent by walking. You wouldn't need a boat.
I want a couple other kind of this thought. I don't know if these are thought experience, but Grand Canyon, to believe that the Grand Canyon was formed by the flood.
Yes, and yeah, for the most part.
Why aren't there Grand Canyons all over the earth?
There's canyons, just not one as big as the Grand one.
So
there's canyons all over the earth. I've heard that question so many times. It's not the Grand Canyon is the grandest. That's why it's called that. That's why it's a wonder of the world. You're not going to find all over the world all of them being Grand Canyons, but you do find tons of canyons all over the place. And so it's all from the water level coming up and coming back down, and it being soft enough. Earth at the time being submerged in water, it's soft enough that it comes down and then baking in the sun. As a matter of fact, the ancient was it Greeks or Romans, ancient people knew this. If you took brick, clay, and all that, and you heated it up in a furnace, it made it 7 times harder. Now imagine what kind of sunlight is hitting the Grand Canyon. It would be super soft after the flood, and then you have the 120-degree heat baking this stuff, making it hard as a rock. Brick, this is how people made bricks in the ancient times. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, and I guess we've gotten off of really the main topic, because there's so much that you're saying that is consistent with a view that if a flood occurred, this here's what the earth looks like. Let's make this fit what the Bible says.
Kind of. I don't agree with that necessarily, but
so I want to move the discussion to what is the best way to build up to a conclusion. Should you build up to a conclusion, or should you start with a conclusion?
A little bit of both. I mean, here's the thing. I don't think you should only look at what you know and then just wait until further evidence comes along. I think what you do is you see what you see, and then you're like, I wonder how this happened. And then you start formulating ideas on like, well, what would make sense? What logically makes this work?
Right.
And I think we do that in everything. I think we do that in science all the time. It's not just me. It's not just religious people. We do that in science all the time. If we want to think about any great engineer, anything that you want to do, if you want to make a plane, like when the Wright brothers made their plane, do you think that they just took the materials around them and said, let's see what happens? Or do you think how can we fly?
They understood that lift can be generated by wings, right?
Exactly.
So
but they figured all of that out first. And then they said, now, if we want to get a vehicle to be able to do that, to fly, how do we reverse engineer this? We know what it will take to make it fly. We know what the conditions are up in the sky. So now we need to construct a craft that is built to handle what we already know. They had an idea in mind, what they wanted, and then they used the knowledge that they had around them to make it fit. And I think that's what Christians are doing with the Bible. It's not that we're saying, okay, how can we make God work? It's we look around us and we go, how is this best explained? How is all of this here? How do we have morality and consciousness and life? What's the best explanation? You don't just take what you already know, or we would never learn anything new. So you have to have grand ideas about what could be, and then start putting these pieces together and see if they actually logically fit. And I think that's what we're doing in Christianity.
So I want to make sure that we take some facts that we understand and build to a conclusion. And if the question is, how did biodiversity occur? Right? We have different animals today. And then I put forward an argument that, so the question is, how did biodiversity occur? We know that there are different animals and plants. Is the theory that you're putting forward that God created us like that?
Yeah, God created all the animals and all the people, and some of them are dead now, a lot of them,
okay.
But yeah.
That is an explanatory theory, right? It perfectly explains how biodiversity occurred, correct?
That and the Tower of Babel, I think, also because when you're talking about different languages, skin color, things like that, that did not happen at creation. God did not make all these different color people during the creation. I think that's a very common misconception too. The Tower of Babel is when God decided to diverse people out to different areas.
I'm just talking about species, how speciation occurred.
Yeah, then God created them, yeah.
So God created the elephant the way the elephant is. And there's a big contradiction that I don't think you've been faced with, that we have versions of elephants earlier, right? And you keep trying to undermine the dating methods that we use that are cross-referenced.
I'm just saying they're not always accurate. I'm not trying to
They're not always accurate. I agree. But
right.
We've got so many different types of animals, modern animals, with earlier versions of which are dated, and you can cross-reference them. And so even if one is wrong, we got 99 others.
Right.
All different types of modern animals being dated older than 40, 20,000 years ago. We understand that genes randomly mutate, and that only organisms which survive can reproduce and pass along their genes. This understanding of the understanding that I have is very elegant. The only assumption that I make is that natural laws are the same as before. And I guess I'd have to assume that a cataclysmic event didn't occur. I can say that a cataclysmic event like the flood occurred and that throws everything out. I think you could fit, there's so many, the only thing is, it's just like, I don't think there's any evidence of that when you hold into the idea that, when you accept the idea that all of these animals modern animals have earlier versions of them out there, even if they're not directly descended, right? So we talked about the Homo group, talked about the Australopithecus group. We may not be directly descended from them, but it's consistent with the idea that animals have changed, hominids have changed over time. And so here we are left with this body of evidence. Like, we have all these different hominids in the ground. We don't have any Homo sapiens older than 300,000 years old. We don't have any Homo habilis outside of that 5 to 7 million years ago mark. We have Homo erectus within a certain time period as well, up to I think about one or 200,000 years ago. And so we're left with thinking, we know that genes mutate. We know that organisms which survive pass along their genes. And we have all of these different life forms moving forward, and we can directly observe life forms shifting in real time during our lives today. To me, the bigger assumption is to think that there was a cataclysmic event and then try to fit the evidence to fit that. So I'm trying to build from a bottom up perspective. I don't think evolution wasn't, the reason why Darwin is given all the credit is just because he's like, oh, look, here's all this evidence. This is a theory which adequately explains it. And he got a lot of stuff wrong, and he didn't have microbiology to support it. He didn't have DNA, things like that. I want to understand why you're taking a top-down approach instead of trying to build up to it.
Well, let me show you one thing that I think is good, is that you are also taking a top-down approach, and you don't even realize it. You're starting with the assumption that humans evolve, that humans evolve from something non-human. You're taking the top-down approach of assuming that all animals evolve from an earlier ancestor.
Was Homo erectus a human? And I'm not sure. Again, like I said, I don't know if
I don't know. Like I said, dude, I'm not a total expert on this. I just believe that there are humans, and then there are non-humans. You can call them primates. You can call them Homo non-human. I don't get Homo non-sapien. I don't know what you call them.
During your opening, I want to. I'll let you finish, and then I want to have a
Well, what I'm saying is you're still taking a top-down approach. You have a belief which is fine, and you're using your perspective and your knowledge to come up with that, and that's a perfectly logical way to live and do any kind of science or knowledge or anything. However, we're both taking a top-down approach. We are both saying, I believe this. Now let's go back and see if everything else fits. And you're doing the exact same thing. You just don't realize it. Now, what I'm doing is I'm saying that there is overwhelming evidence for a flood. You don't have to believe it. I can't make you believe it, but there is definitely, if you look into the evidence, there is a ton of evidence. Now, does that prove that it happened? Nope. But it is evidential support for that theory. Now, also, you talk about the Tower of Babel. That explains. Now, is it proven? Can I prove that to you? Of course not. It is a belief based on all these other things, and it perfectly logically fits with what we see. Same thing with the flood. Same thing with we never to this day have ever in the history of time seen a human give birth to anything non-human. We have never seen anything non-human give birth to a human.
Doesn't claim that would happen.
No, but the point is in evolution theory, you have to make the assumption that a human or any animal is spawned over millions of you throw in this fantasy number of millions of years, and then you say with enough time and with enough genetics and with enough chance,
which there's evidence for all of those
will
things,
turn into something else.
There's plenty of evidence for all of
that. We've never seen that happen.
We have plenty of bacteria.
Are you gonna let me finish, dude?
Yeah.
So we've seen bacteria turn into other bacteria. We have seen amoebas turn into other amoebas. We have seen humans turn into other humans. We have never seen anything non-human give birth to a human. You are putting that in because you're relying, which is fine. This is not a problem because I do it too. You're relying on what your previous experience and knowledge of other things lead you that way. You're saying that, well, we see genetic mutation. Yes, we do. But most of it, you've admitted yourself, is mostly harmful or can cause death. It's very rare that there's any beneficial mutation. And we almost never see a random mutation carry on to the offspring and then to another offspring. It almost never happens, if ever at all. I can't think of one case where it has, but maybe it has. Then you're also saying that because there's so many fossils of so many animals that are similar, you're assuming that one changed into another, or one of them was the ancestor of what we see today. You have no idea if that's true. You're just assuming that, and that's fine because I am also making assumptions. But the last point, the big one, is this: the fossil thing. Not one fossil would ever, and most people don't get this, no fossil on Earth would count in a court of law. And the reason for that is because you cannot take any fossil on the planet, any of them, and prove that it had an offspring. Now, is there a good chance it did? Of course there is. Probably it did. But you can't prove that it did. And you definitely can't prove that it had a different one with some kind of an evolutionary advantage that carried on from one to the next. So to say that looking at fossils and looking at speciation or adaptation, which I call it, to say that any of that means that evolution is the correct answer, I just don't believe that. Plus, evolution cannot explain why there's consciousness, why there's life at all, why humans are completely different than any other animal. Almost every single animal on the planet in the history of time, their main thing is we live, we eat, we sleep, we breed, the end. That's every animal. No animal is like a human being. We are special for a very specific reason.
How much more time would you like before I can respond?
I just want to say, dude, that like you're doing the same thing as me, and I applaud you for it because you're doing it very eloquently. You're very smart at what you're trying to accomplish. All I'm saying is to frame it up the way you did and pretend like that is easily a more logical answer. It's just not. There's so many things that evolution does not explain, but when you look at the Bible and the story that's been said and you follow up with actual science and you look at the world and what we see today, it does make sense. And it covers way more than just diversity of life. It covers why life exists at all, why there's consciousness, why there's morality, why there's a universe, but that has nothing to do with evolution. But my point is, the Bible explains so much with very few things that it can't cover, whereas evolution only describes diversity of life, and it doesn't even do it that well, if I'm being honest.
It does it very well. Over the course of the past 5 minutes, you have built about 6 or 7 straw men of my position and torn them down. There are so many facts that you kind of threw out there about, you told me what I believe or what I accept about evolution.
Just by what you've told me, that's all.
You did not do a good job of recapitulating the things that I've said during this debate.
Okay.
So I want to make sure that we understand that, and anybody watching who's getting frustrated, understand that I'm recognizing that you did not attack my position. You attacked the straw man and then committed a Tupac fallacy on my straw man. You're trying to say that I'm doing the same thing as you, and that because yours has explanatory power, that yours must be correct.
That's not what I'm saying.
Okay, please correct me. So that way I don't commit
what I'm saying wrong.
Please correct me.
I'm saying that with this explanatory power that you're talking about, the reason I believe it, I never said it's 100% true, and I never say that it's 100% true. I say this is why I believe it, is because it perfectly lines up with everything else that we see. It does have explanatory power, I'll give you that. But I never once said, I'm right, you're wrong. You could very well be 100% right, and I could be totally living in a fantasy world. I'm sure half the people watching think that anyway. The point that I'm getting at is because it explains so much, very well, in fact, and none of it contradicts anything that we see in the real world today. That is why I believe so heavily. I've never once said that I know I'm right or that God definitely exists and that evolution is nonsense. I'm just saying I don't believe it because there's not good enough evidence. And I do believe in the evidence that I put forward because I think there's overwhelming evidence. But I can't promise you that I'm right and that you're wrong. And I would never say that to you.
Yeah, and at the beginning, I wanted to make sure you're saying evolution. Absolutely, it's only the answer to one question: how did biodiversity occur? That's the only thing I've attempted to argue about. I guess I'm trying to say this could, if I'm a Christian and I'm like, man, evolution has all this evidence. I looked on the websites that have been suggested, and yes, there's plenty of evidence and plenty of transitional fossils. And I looked into the different dating methods that there are out there, and why do they say that they're a certain million years old? There's an index to creationist claims on talkorigins.com, including the fact that radiometric dating doesn't work well. There's all sorts of scholarly articles listed out on talkorigins.org about that. And it's not just evolutionists saying that. We've got Christians through BioLogos who have accepted these things, producing articles there. We've got just peer-reviewed journalists and experts in those fields talking about when can we accept certain dating, when can't we, what kind of assumptions do we have to make, and are they reliable based on the preponderance of evidence, number one, and then the evidence which fits together through other disciplines and fields. I never said that humans gave birth to non-humans. In your opening statement, you made a point about, well, we should just take labels off of all the species. Great, let's do that. Let's say that there is no such thing as Homo habilis. There's just an organism producing slightly different organisms over time, and then slow transitions over that time, which you agreed with. There are, I wrote down that we have never seen major gaps within some of these. Your complaint there is that we have too many transitional fossils, and so they're very similar, and then over time they change. I'm not saying that any modern animals came from any specific specimen that we found. It's possible that there were other similar organisms out there. So I just want to make sure that, all these points that you brought up that you're saying that I have to accept, I'm only making a claim about how biodiversity occurs, and it's through evolution by natural selection. And then nowadays we have artificial selection within the past 100 or so thousand years. I don't think it's controversial. I think you can have Christianity, you can have God, you can have Jesus as God. The evidence builds to the fact that biodiversity happened because of evolution through natural selection. The evidence is there, and you can build up to
perspective. And I said that in my opening statement. I said there is plenty of evidence for evolution. It's just that's evidence. It's not proof. See, like I said before, which, by the way, you keep accusing me of building your straw mans and misrepresenting you. You're doing the exact same thing to me. I never said we should get rid of labels.
Point it out so I can be better.
Never said that. You said that I said we should get rid of labels on animals. Never said that. I said that when science adds all these different names, because people were talking about scientific names, I said there's a squirrel gives birth to a squirrel. We see that all the time in science. We rely on that. Farmers rely on, when they plant a tomato, they're going to get a tomato. They don't think that there's going to be some genetic mutation that evolves tomatoes into the next fruit or the next vegetable, however way you want to look at that. What I'm saying is when you start adding all these different names to scientific names, you start losing the idea of what it is you're talking about. You start relying more on the Homo sapien, Homo erectus, Homo this. Are they human or not? And that's the point. Because if it's a non-human, which I'm not saying you're saying that humans give birth to non-humans. We've never seen any human give birth to any non-human. So I'm not saying anybody is saying that because it's never happened. What I am saying, though, is that you're saying that the evidence is overwhelming for humans eventually evolving from something that's non-human.
That's not my position. I'm building an argument that I'm not saying
got humans here. Then let me ask you that, because you keep avoiding that part of the question.
Okay.
Did humans come from something that was non-human?
I'm sorry?
Did humans evolve from something non-human?
That's an interesting question. I'm not sure.
That's what I'm saying, dude.
So listen,
that right there, the fact that you can't answer that is the point that I'm trying to make.
The theory would suggest that yes, we did evolve from non-humans.
Now, you said that I said there's too many transitional fossils. That also was false. I did not say that there's too many transitional fossils. What I did say is that all of these fossils that look like transitional fossils, they are similar animals. There's different types of cows, different types of horses, different types of fish and dogs and all these different things. None of them are a non-human.
Where did horses
eventually becoming a human? And when you ask an evolutionist, the one question you can never get an answer to from an evolutionist is if you ask about what's the non-human that a human came from, they say, well, it doesn't work like that. It slowly changes over time until okay, well then what makes a human?
Because it's a straw man of
before a human that made the human, because there is no transitional fossil from that thing that's just about to be a human, but it's not, and then it gives birth to now what we consider a human.
Homo erectus is pretty close, and there may have been a relative of, or early on in the Homo erectus's lineage, there may have been a common ancestor between Homo erectus and Homo sapiens.
Was that a human?
Listen, so this is where I agree with you, where I'm maybe confused now on your position on the labels that we attach to these things. If you take a deck of cards, have you heard this analogy before, where you have a picture of a human, like my generation, and then I take my picture of me off. I got my parents. I keep going. I have great-grandparents, great-great-great-grandparents. After 2 million cards, we have an organism that does not look like me.
Right. Absolutely.
And each picture looks almost exactly like the picture before it and after
Exactly.
it. So did I come from? So we have me, and that picture is that. Did I come from a non-human? Then, if that's not if we would look at that and label that, I don't know, Homo habilis, like more millions of generations before, would we say that Homo habilis is a human?
And here's how you answer that. If say you can go far enough back to an amoeba or the single-celled organism, right?
Sure.
That's the farthest back we can get without a bio.
That's what the theory would suggest.
Okay,
yes.
so say it takes 1 million decacards just to make the
Be
number.
more, yeah, 1 million decks of 1 million
exactly,
cards.
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah, exactly. So all right, so say you have 1 million decks or 1 million cards, and the first one starts with a single cell organism, and the very last one is a human being. What I want you to show me is the two back to back, where one is now a human and the one right before it is not a human. That's all I want to see. As soon as I see that, and you can prove that each one of these, a single-celled organism lived billions of years ago, and now the humans live now, you show me in chronological order that these things match up, and then show me those two cards back to back, where the one is not human and the next one is. When I see that, I will throw everything that I've set out, and I will definitely be an evolutionist.
Now, would you say that there was a human-like thing before the first human, even if it was Homo habilis, and then eventually what we would call Homo habilis occurred? I mean, it's like the first non-chicken to lay a chicken egg surely looked just like a chicken, right?
Well, but you're assuming in evolution, you're assuming that. I'm
How is that an assumption?
That a chicken was always a chicken.
How is that an assumption?
No before chicken.
That's your assumption.
Right.
Your assumption is that there was nothing before chickens.
Yeah, 100%.
And we can track the different kinds of chickens, where they've come from, and we can track where mammals came from. I mean, we can track a lot of early birds.
Can you show me a chicken? Can you show me the chicken that never gave birth to eggs, and then the very next chicken that it evolved started giving birth to eggs?
So did the chicken or the egg come first? Eggs evolved way before chickens. Eggs are a reptilian.
So why did the chicken not lay eggs for a while then? If the egg came before the chicken.
It wasn't a chicken yet.
See, you don't see the problem in what you're saying?
I don't.
Because you're saying that basically, which there's zero evidence of this, by the way, but just we'll put that to the side for a second. You're saying that there was a chicken that gave birth to other chickens, or it's a chicken-like animal, and then it gave birth to other chicken-like animals, not in an egg, by the way. And then all of a sudden, the very next thing was a chicken, and it gave birth with eggs.
What we call now,
There's
listen.
no evidence of that.
So 100 generations ago of chickens would have been slightly different than chickens we have today. At what point do we say that we have the modern food chicken? I forget what it's called. There's a specific species that we've named that we've given to the white chicken with the waddle. That chicken didn't exist until humans artificially selected for it. Out of the original.
Again, these are all based on assumptions.
That's not.
If a chicken was there during creation, if God made chickens, then everything you just said is nonsense. It didn't happen. You're asking me to answer a question based on the evolution theory that I don't believe in. I can't answer that question because I think it's nonsense.
We have evidence that there are beings before chickens. And back to, again, mammals have a common ancestor, is what the theory says. And so all of the evidence that we have suggests that modern animals, we've got transitional beings that are very similar to modern animals, but are also very different. And so I think, is the creation model then that God created all of the current species that we have, or all the species that have ever existed, all at once, and that 99% of them died out? Is that the creation model?
Could be. Yeah. I don't know that it's 99%. Like, I don't know if that number is 100% accurate. What I'm saying is we know that there are a ton of animals that are not with us today. We know that there's a ton of extinct animals that we don't see on the earth today. Now, there's many reasons for that, whether they've died out because their surroundings have changed, or they can't adapt to it, or whatever, or that something else has eaten it, or the flood happened and killed it off. There's so many different ways that an animal can go extinct. I mean, we've seen animals in recent history go extinct, and it had nothing to do with a flood or evolution. It's just that they're either dying out faster than they can produce.
So do you agree that there are thousands and thousands of examples of organisms which are no longer around today?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So would you say that there are more organisms that have existed than there are today?
I don't know. Maybe.
Okay. My understanding is that there most likely was. And again, I'm not entirely sure. I might get roasted in the comments about exactly how many specimens that we have.
Right.
But we don't have any more examples of Homo habilis, so we don't know if they could have existed. Every modern organism that we have has ancient versions of. There are many examples, a preponderance of examples of modern animals and possible ancestral organisms for that animal. And it is just like, because we have that progression, both anatomically, genetically, time-wise, in a timeline based on the fossil record, based on radiometric dating, which again, you're the one that's having to make the claim that God exists, that there was a flood. Those are at least two huge assumptions. In addition, compared to, and all I need are those two. I'm not sure what else you have compared to my one that from a naturalistic perspective or from a methodological naturalistic perspective, I can accept that evolution explains biodiversity. God could still exist. Jesus could still be God. And evolution still stands because there's less assumptions on that point.
Yeah.
Hey, just let me interject right here, guys. Hey, first of all, thank you for anybody that's been with us from the jump. We're just over the 2-hour mark with the debate. And if you have been in the chat, I noticed the viewers have been declining, which is understandable. But if you've been here from the get-go, thank you. And I think we've got a bromance blossoming in the chat with Mr. Schuyler Fiction and the conservative Christian. That's David Gonzalez. If they want to debate and duke it out, I'll host it. I'll even put on the what's that thing Schuyler's got? The Velocer looking thing. He's got the cool dude on his channel. Anyhow, you guys want to set up a debate. I know David is really good and cordial. Come on the channel. I think John Anthony was talking about Hobo Santa. That would be awesome. I've seen Schuyler grows a beard and he immediately looks like he's 50, but he's younger than most of us. But I don't know. I need demonstrable evidence that he's in his 30s. Guys, let's do some closing statements because we've got to wrap this up. We got Tom Jump coming on at 9 o'clock tonight to do a chat. So if you guys want to go get a shower, put some leave-in conditioner in your beards if you have beards, and come back at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard. We got Tom Jump talking to Oz and the Atheist Roundtable. But guys, if you want to go to a closing statement and wrap this up, that'd be great.
Yeah, this should be a lot shorter than the opening one. Do you want to do it in the same order, Adam? Is that okay? All right. That looked like a yes to me. So just for my closing statement, I got a lot of agreement with Adam that genes do randomly mutate, and that organisms which survive and reproduce pass on their genes. These two facts, all right, the things that we can all agree on are basically all you need to accept that, okay, moving backwards in time, organisms shift, and you'd have many, many different types of organisms going back in time. Taking from a modern human, you might have different types of hominids or humans before then for any animal. And I know this is going to seem weak after all this demonstration. I'm still trying to process and trying to remember exactly what we discussed about each thing. So genes randomly mutate. In order to pass on, you have to have organisms which survive. All right. We do have an archaeological fossil record. Adam agrees that we have a fossil record. The interpretation of where that fossil record comes from and how it got to look the way that it is where we disagree. I'm just using the understanding that we have from all of the different disciplines, like plate tectonics. I'm not dismissing that the idea of a flood could ever occur. It's just that I don't think a flood would be able to mess up the archaeological fossil record to such a degree that we couldn't accept that there is a record that lays out in chronological order ancient organisms to modern organisms. I think that may be our big disagreement there. I mentioned biogeographical distribution. I only asked like one question on this about like like kangaroos. It's really a description of natural pressures, which is a defense of natural selection. So biogeographical distribution, we know where certain species are, we know where they go. They change based on their location. North and south rim squirrels, we got different colors for their hair. They've speciated, they can no longer mate together. That's just an example of that. We've got anatomical evidence, things like vestigial organs, bones. Whales have legs, right? They've got the hip bones with the vestigial bones poking out. That's an indication that earlier organisms may have been walking on land. We may have had things like amphibians leading up to whales. You'll have to look into that a little bit more. Along with that anatomical evidence, things like human origins can be explained by that, and not necessarily that we directly descended from the specimens that we have, but that there were organisms at the time which could have led to us, and they may be cousins to organisms that led to us based on, and we know that based on the anatomical evidence of those specimens. We also have direct observation of evolution, speciation, organisms changing over time. And again, all we've got to do, the only assumption that you need to have is that the natural laws that we have, things like genetics, things like just a continuation of time, we have to accept that there is enough time for it to happen. Natural laws are consistent within the last 2.5 billion years. That's the only assumption I have to make. I don't have to assume that God doesn't exist. I don't have to make the assumption that Jesus wasn't God or anything like that. Given the body of facts and modest assumption I make, evolution by natural selection most likely happened. It explains biodiversity so well and with very few conflicting facts or observations. So Adam has attempted to undermine it. He's talked about radiometric dating may not be reliable, and in many cases it may not be, but the experts in that field are the best ones to go to with explanations for, okay, why do we know that this is within a certain range of time? That's a completely separate fact from the fact that we do have the archaeological record, which I've already mentioned. So yeah, and he didn't provide any groundbreaking evidence, which counters the best experts' opinions in their given fields. So based on that, I believe that I've defended or explained evolution fairly well for anybody new. And I strongly recommend biologos.org for a Christian point of view on evolution, talkorigins.org for the literal evidence, pictures, links to peer-reviewed journals, things like that. And then for human origins, the Human Origins Project website from the Smithsonian Institute. With that, I'll let Adam close.
We good? We good to go? First I want to thank you guys for even having me on, letting me and Ben do this. I think it was great. Ben, I love you, dude. You're a great dude. So none of this has changed anything for me and him as far as I'm concerned, but we just disagree, and that's fine. I do think that there is a ton of evidence to support what I'm saying. I think that he made good points going to the what Biologos was it, the website, and I think that for people wanting to check out a creation standpoint, there's a few people on TikTok. One guy, I hope I don't butcher this, especially on here, but I think his name's David Reeves or Rives. Rives. He does really good work on showing the creation model. He shows that there is Triceratops, I believe it is, dinosaur with the skin still on it. And we know in biology that skin cannot last past a few hundred or thousand years, which would show that this dinosaur had to have lived within the last couple hundred years or maybe 1,000 or so. But that being said, there's also a great website I think gives a ton of good information and evidence for creation called Is Genesis History? It is, I guess, a little bit more biblically related, but it also shows a ton of evidence for creation. So that being said, I do think that Ben put it very eloquently, very brilliantly, the way he laid it all out. I think that expert or not, I think he did a very good service to the evolution theory. I think he's very knowledgeable on that. And but what I will say is that at this point, I wasn't trying to undermine anything. It was just that I was trying to lay out the case for what I believe. And I think that if you take all of those things that I said about the flood, if you look into just the flood, you will see there is overwhelming evidence for a flood. If you look at any one of these specific things on its own and Google search and do a lot of research, you'll see that the things I'm saying is not some falsified version of any of this stuff. I believe everything that I said is 100% true. I'm not trying to give any false information and just have you believe me. So please double check everything I said. But that being said, I think that when it comes to the evolution theory, yes, I do think it is a very sound theory. It makes logical, sound reasoning or logical, um, it makes logical sense that if you're just talking about diversity, yes, there is genetic mutations that can happen, but it's very rare that it's beneficial. It's even rarer that it carries on to the next generation, and it's even rarer than that it carries on to the next generation after that. So it's a very wild assumption to assume that if you insert enough time, which that's when people say that we use the God of the gaps, that's the evolutionist version of the God of the gaps. If you put in enough time, maybe these things will happen. I still hold dearly to the belief that no dog has ever produced a non-dog. No human has ever produced a non-human. Nothing that is non-human ever produced a human. We've never seen this happen. We do see speciation or quote unquote adaptation. We see like if a black person and a white person have a child, they have a mixed child. That child is going to be a lighter skin than the dark father. That's going to be a darker skin than the light mother. We do see differences like that, but we don't ever see something that is an evolutionary advantage like what we're being taught in school. I think that it's insane that we teach kids this as a fact. Now, if you want to learn about evolution and you want to learn about creation, I think that all of that is fine to do on your own time. What I don't like is that we're teaching one in school like it's a known fact with zero flaws, even though I think I've laid out a few flaws with evolution. Also, the thing about evolution that we did not even touch on tonight, which I wanted to get into, was the fact that evolution, where it does explain diversity in life, it does not at all explain why there is life. It doesn't explain why we have a consciousness. It does not explain why we have thoughts or dreams or awareness. It does not explain why there's a morality. Why would there be morality if we just evolved? If we are just creatures, that there is no God, if there is no source of a mind beyond our own, why would we even have morality? Because the only argument that we really ever say when it comes to this is that we want what's good for the society. But why would you care? Why would it matter? None of that would even make sense if we just evolved. It should be about wanting for you to survive at all costs. Because if this is the only life you ever get, and this is the only time you're ever going to experience, why wouldn't you want it to be as great and easy and best for you specifically as possible? Who cares what's going to happen 100 years from now if we're just a bunch of chemicals and neurons firing off at random times? And if that was the case, if we were just a random collection of chemicals and your thoughts and all this did not come from a mind beyond our own, why would you be able to trust your own thoughts? You would not have free will. You would just be reacting constantly. It would just be the chemicals telling you what to think, what to do, how to live. So none of that makes sense when you think about evolution taking place. This is one of the big things. We never even got into this, me and Ben, but I think this is one of the most compelling things against evolution, is that if a single-celled amoeba is asexual or whatever, that it is not male, it is not female, what kind of an evolutionary advantage would it be to all of a sudden create the need for male and female? If you could just produce on your own, why would you ever evolve into needing somebody else? That doesn't make an ounce of sense. It actually goes against morality or evolution. Morality also goes against evolution, because we are one of the only species on Earth, if not the only species, that thinks that it's wrong to rape, which I agree with. I'm not trying to make a case for it. But in the animal kingdom, almost every single animal rapes to produce offspring. That is just a normal standard in the world. For some reason, we've evolved into thinking that it's wrong to rape. And now if the only thing you're concerned of is what's going to be great for the human race, why would rape be a problem? See, there's so many things that are wrong with the evolutionary theory that extend far beyond diversity of life, which is the bigger reasons as to why I don't believe in evolution. But me and Ben just tried to keep it limited to diversity of life. So I'm very limited in how I can answer if I have to eliminate all these other things that go against evolution. I do think that he's got a very good point and he's got a very good perspective. And I don't think anybody that believes in evolution is a dummy or anything for believing it. It's a very sound reason for believing in the diversity of life. However, it totally throws out all of those other things. It does not line up at all with any of those other things. And first off, how could evolution, natural selection, Ben made the point earlier where he said, it's not that it does this for benefit, it chooses. Well, now you're inserting that there's a mind in there, that that natural selection has to choose what's good for something. And I'm not saying Ben is saying that. I'm saying the majority of evolutionists say this. They say that with natural selection, it selects. It doesn't create, it doesn't make new, it selects. And so there's just so many things about evolution that do not make an ounce of sense when you look at the history of the world, why we exist, why there's morality, why there's consciousness. None of these things line up with that theory. And so it's very difficult for me to buy into that. That being said, I don't knock people that believe in evolution. What I do think is a problem is how much it's assumed that it's a proven fact when it clearly isn't. Nothing has ever produced a different type. It has only produced the same type of, like a dog produces a dog, but the dog may look different. A cat produces a cat, but the cat may look a little different. It's still a cat. And we did that great thought experiment. Ben, you were brilliant for that, to say the deck of cards, the 1 million, because yes, if you start with an amoeba and you end at a human being and they have very tiny, slight changes, I want to just see the one that is not human and then the one right next to it that is human. When you can show me the non-human that produced the human, or the non-chicken that never laid eggs give birth to a chicken that then laid eggs, that's what I want to see. If you can show me just one of that, then I would say, well, I guess I was wrong the whole time. Evolution clearly is legit. But right now, the only thing that we see in evolution is adaptation, which I don't think is evolution at all. I think that it's very wrong that they call it microevolution, because it gives off the assumption that it is evolution. And adaptation is not. You can adapt one way and you can adapt right back. We do it all the time. But in evolution, you get rid of weaknesses or you gain strengths, and then you carry that on to the offspring. If I went to the gym right now, and I'll close with this, I'm sorry for rambling, but if I go to the gym right now and I just become massive and buff and swole, and then I have a kid, 9 months later, that kid ain't going to be massive and buff and swole. It's adaptation. You're putting yourself through stress to adapt to your environment. That this is not evolution. So me and Ben do agree on that, I believe. But I hate the term that it's called microevolution, because it assumes that all these other evolutions come with it. That being said, guys, I love you. I thank you so much for having me on. And Ben, I appreciate you doing this with me, dude. No love lost, dude. You're still my guy, man. So I appreciate you doing this. And that's it, guys.
Great debate. Actually, I really enjoyed it. I've been back here eating atheist pizza this whole time. What a great debate. And look, if anybody wants to follow Adam Rich, he does have a YouTube channel, and I'm going to post links in the actual real comment section of the video shortly. I want to also ask a kind gesture of y'all. So if you can comment in the actual comment section of this video at a later time, if you could pick apart the argumentation from both Ben and Adam and be respectful, and just maybe point out some of the things that you think are problematic with the positions. Because I know a lot of the guests will come back into the video and check. And we do really respect Adam. He's a reoccurring member of TART. He comes on the show, and we're also looking to collaborate with Adam in the future. So Adam's going to be taking calls from a theist perspective in the future. So we look to work with Adam. So just be mindful of that. Also, Ben is a practitioner of street epistemology. Yeah, and I wanted to mention that when it comes to Ben and most of the atheists, not the Atheist Roundtable, we hold the position that there isn't a reason to believe, or justified reason to believe in a god or a deity or deities, and that human reason is incapable of proving or providing sufficient rational grounds to justify either the belief that a god exists or that the belief that God does not exist. So we're not holding the affirmation there. But Ben, thank you again for your input today.
Yeah,
and
very exciting.
Yeah, awesome. And if you guys want to rejoin us later, we're going to be going live at 9 p.m. tonight with T-Jump or Tom Jump. And if you're a fan of Tom Jump, check out Tom Jump or T-Jump on the YouTubes. And with that being said, as Austin always says, with that being said, we really do appreciate it. Thank you for visiting the Atheist Roundtable.